Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Brittany, and I want to welcome you all to the Lync 2013 First Look Seminar. First, we'll talk about a couple optimization tools. Then we'll introduce our speaker, Doug Niles, and he'll take over and give his presentation. We'll then have Brian Long talk about Quick Start and show some of our Lync classes that we offer. We'll also have Q&A for any questions you might have for Doug or Brian. We will also have a closing survey that will be emailed to you by Friday. Once you fill out the survey, you'll receive the recording of the seminar. Like I said, this first look is being recorded, which will be emailed to you after you take the survey. We do have an upcoming webinar on SharePoint 2013 next week on June 27th. You can read more about what the presentation will be on and register it at quickstart.com/events, or you can email me for more details. To optimize your experience during the webinar, feel free to ask questions by clicking on the message icon and typing in the box at the bottom left. If Doug sees that your question is one he can answer without going too off topic, he will answer as he's presenting. Otherwise, Doug will answer any questions at the end during Q&A. If you don't want to see the chat section, go ahead and click the X at the top of the message box. You can view the screen and presentation in full screen by clicking the icon at the bottom right. I'll now hand it over to Doug Niles, who is one of Quick Start's own instructors, and he'll give his presentation on Lync 2013.
Good morning, everyone. We're changing views here for a moment, so you're going to give it a couple seconds, and then you should see actually a PowerPoint slide show up here. Here we go. All right, welcome aboard for a little 3-hour overview, as you can see, from the clinic, in this case, 40029, First Look Clinic, on what's new for Lync. We're going to modify this just a little bit because Lync has been out for a little bit here. So, well, it is some new content as well, too. We're going to be talking about what's currently running. And there'll be a couple modifications of the slides, just because some of the data was a little old when it was originally released in this case. So more of an FYI, there's going to be a few things where we're definitely going to move off of the PowerPoint slides. I have a little demo here where I've actually built out a Lync environment. So we'll have a couple front-end servers, a couple SQL servers. We'll talk about topology builder, the planning guide, those sort of things as we look at this. But again, it's a little 3-hour class in this case, going over really sort of the new parts of Lync. A little bit about facilities in this case. Again, they just add this to the PowerPoint slide, but we'll go for about 3 hours this year. You guys are more than welcome to ask questions during. If it's on the subject that we're talking about in this case, I'll hopefully try to answer it as we go through. If not, we've got QA at the end of this as well too. Just a little bit of my background as we go through this. I've been teaching here at Quick Start for 15 years. I've been teaching, if you want to say, the Lync configuration, but it would really be LCS 03, 05, OCS R1, R2, Lync 10, Lync 13. So I've been teaching this for quite some time. And it's a fun class to teach. And the subject itself, of course, is a fun one to get into. So there's a lot of different areas you can get into with this. And that's one of the things that hopefully when you're here to see that, when we look at all the different parts that potentially you could build this out to. It's not to say you have to. You can start it very simply with a simple little we're going to do instant messaging and conferencing on-premise. And then if you decide to, maybe build out, connecting into your enterprise voice, connecting back to a PBX system, connecting back to a Cisco environment, a VIA system, your phone system, if you choose to. And of course, then remote access, federation, PIC, different things you get into. You can get into Exchange Unified Messaging. So now you're looking at your potentially putting your voicemail there. Obviously, we're dealing with SQL. So as you look at all the different parts that potentially we could get into, you're talking Active Directory, security groups, PKIs, certificates, DNS records, IS, web applications, obviously the servers themselves, and the updates, and don't forget SQL. And if we want to, I also forgot about SharePoint. So there's lots of things that we can touch and get into with Lync. The question is whether or not you decide you want to build it out to that level. And that's sort of a little bit of what we're going to cover the next 3 hours or so in this case. Here's sort of the objectives, as you can see. Again, we're going to sort of go through, take a look at sort of the functionality of Lync itself, as well as looking at, again, sort of one of the things that some of you, I'm assuming, have already been working with a little bit of either OCS or Lync, but looking at how this connects between one machine to another machine, the fact that you can have multiple devices connected, endpoints is what we would call them, or smart endpoints. Looking at literally going from an instant message into a conference into sharing your desktop. The fact that your help desk help desk can go and actually just start an instant message with somebody who's asking for requests for help, and literally the end user can share their desktop, and the help desk person can work on it right there. So in this case, you can get rid of some of the travel potentially. Again, depending on if you build out different parts of it. There's going to be some changes from Lync, obviously 10, going into Lync 13. One of the things, of course, is the multi-view video. We're currently not having video, at least in this one webinar that we're doing, but you're going to see that in Lync 10, and actually going backwards in OCR 2, you had really one video feed. You had your feed, and you had somebody else's video feed that you're watching, and you had the panoramic view if you decided to implement that part of it. In Lync 13, you can actually have up to 5 different video feeds. So it's a little different in this case, and the scaling is a little bit different as well too. So there's definitely a planning side to this. But we'll take a look at a little bit, again, one of the new functions that you have in here. The functions, of course, with the Office Web App Server, or we call it, the older term was, again, the Web Application Server, but dealing with the fact that we now have the Office Web Apps, potentially either from SharePoint itself, or if you build a standalone edition, the ability to go in and render out not only PowerPoint slides in this case, but embedded audio that you have within the PowerPoint slides. If you're familiar with SharePoint, the Office Web App Server is what you implement in order to render, say, like Word, PowerPoint, OneNote within a browser. So literally you do not have to have the Office suite on your machine, on your client machines in order to be able to do that. So the Office Web App Server just extends this into Lync. The web app, which a lot of you are actually using right now, is a new change for 13 versus 10. In 10, it did not support audio and video, and in 13, it does, and that's a huge change from just from a configuration standpoint. Now, granted, you do have to install a plugin, so like a lot of you probably this morning when you connected in this morning in the web app, there was a little plugin saying, do you want to install this to hear the audio and video? But that's a new change that's a nice change, trust me, from 10 to 13. So we'll take a look at the mobile devices. That's a big thing. This has definitely changed again from 10 to 13. So 13, of course, you have the ability to actually make a phone call with the Lync mobile devices. You didn't have that option, which is sort of a little disappointing from a Lync 10 standpoint. So yeah, I mean, you can do instant messaging, but that was about it. So we now have a full audio that goes along with the mobile devices. Virtual desktop support is now supported in this case, and we'll look a little bit more in this in module, sort of the first module here. There's a plugin you have to install, but it allows you to do what we call really a media redirect. The actual audio and video is actually playing from the client, so the thin client, but you do the configuration on your actual server, so it actually now is supported. It's not to say that people didn't do it in Lync 10, but it really wasn't configured right, and most of the time it was either choppy or bad video, just because, again, the servers really weren't designed to handle audio video, so that's been updated and changed. One of the things we'll definitely get into, of course, is the brick model. This is a new change. When we get into actually how you build Lync in this case, using SQL mirroring in this case, not SQL clustering. Clustering was supported in 10 and OCSR2, but clustering is not supported in 13. The storage service, which actually, so LYSS, but the storage service is a new service that we have that helps us actually replicate data back and forth. And again, another term you're going to hear is actually the Windows Fabric as well, too. We'll take a look at the topology because the topology builder itself is different, and of course then obviously the operating system and the changes with it. So we'll definitely get into disaster recovery and high availability. This is a big area that they spent some time on and updating, modifying. They definitely listened back from customer feedback and looked at how we could build this out. Some of you may be familiar with what we call the metropolitan deployment, which was in really Lync 10, OCSR2. Which was 2 different data centers in different locations that really sounded great when you read the paper, but when you started actually building it out, there was, less than somewhere between 20 and 30 milliseconds was the in between the data centers, and it really got really expensive really quick. And so with this, we're going into again DR and HA, the fact that we can do a pooling of pair of the pool, but go in and actually set up with mirroring as well too. Now we actually have our high availability disaster recovery, so it really doesn't matter how far your, if you want to say data centers are, you can still have one and actually have a full disaster recovery on the other side. So, conferencing features, we'll probably get into this right off the bat as we the first module talks about conferencing features, so a little bit of what we're doing here. We do have support for IP6, so this is a new thing that we didn't have in 10, which surprised me in a way. An extensible message presence protocol, so XMPP, has now actually been brought into what they call a first level server. It's actually installed on the front end server as well as the edge server. So you got the proxy and the gateway that's actually are configured on both of those machines. So changes between what we had in OCS R2 and 10 on that part of it. Persistent chat, some of you might have known this as group chat. Persistent chat is now, again, another first level server. It's actually part of the installation now, where it's a separate installation that you had. If you don't know what persistent chat is the ability to go in and have permanent chat rooms or long-term chat rooms where you can post content if you'd allow it. You can have an add-in. Generally, in a way, some people like to look at it as sort of like a SharePoint team site, but specifically within Lync. So, one of the things that you'll definitely get into if you decide to roll this out from a Lync standpoint is probably a little bit of end-user training, especially in conferencing. There's enough changes in it that you really need to go in and do. It doesn't have to be long, but enough to where they really sort of understand the different parts when we look at this. Just from the different buttons that are there, the different options that we have, the different views that you have. There is a software development kit that you can download. So if you want to get into customizing your applications as well as integrating the Lync client, in this case, you can actually modify it and also bring the presence level into your own customized applications. You can actually get into the SDK kit. There's quite a few code that's already part of it that you can actually just extract out and embed in this case. So sort of the objectives we're going to get into, this is sort of the topics that we'll get into. As you can see, again, sort of the introduction to the new features, the functionality. 2, we'll get into the architecture and deployment. And 3, we'll look at a little bit of the integration and extensibility on that part of it. If you have other questions that are within the frames of this, definitely ask them. Like I said, I've got a whole virtual set of images that I've got built over the last couple of days, so we can sort of dive into some areas and actually take a look at that versus just looking at PowerPoint slides. So. From a fun little question in this case, sort of get you guys used to using Lync in this case. How many of you actually are running, let's say, either Lync 10 or Lync 13 already? $2010, okay. Tim, okay, 2013. Wow, okay, so we're definitely 2010, couple 2013s. There we go. Yay, we got somebody still on OCS. All right. Okay, well, let me show you what I've sort of got up and running in this case. Is I've got a little environment that we're going to take a look at. I'm using actually 2 different machines at the moment. We got a bunch of different virtual images, but as you can see in this case, I've got a domain controller. It's in a simple little domain. I've got 2 SQL servers that are on that actual domain that are in the London pool in this case, and I'm going to talk about obviously SQL mirroring and the high availability. We'll get in and take a look at that. I've only got one front-end server, but it is in the Enterprise Edition. And of course, then we've got the Edge server I've got pre-configured, and of course, then we have one client. If I look at other machine in this case, we've got our Exchange server. So we'll take a look at unified messaging in this case. The persistent chat, we just call it chat01. I've got an Office web app configuration that we'll take a look at, and of course then I've got a second site, so I've got one backend SQL server over here and a front-end server that's also Enterprise Edition, and then one client for that configuration. So we've got a few things we're going to take a look at, and just to sort of show you, for some of you who have not seen, in this case, Lync 13, this is what the actual control panel looks like after you actually start your deployment. So it looks a lot like 10. So like I said, a lot of you guys are in 10. Kevin, in this case, since you nicely said that you were actually running on OCS, for anybody running OCS, this is going to be a little bit of a change. To be honest, what you're used to in OCS days is going to look more like what we call the topology builder in Lync 10/13. So that'll be a little bit of change. Also, Kevin, you're dealing with the fact that we have Silverlight installed. Will be a little bit of difference, but you'll be able to, once you understand where everything is, trust me, you'll get used to the control panel very easily. When I teach these classes, literally by the end of maybe Tuesday at the most people are very comfortable moving in and out of the control panel. So for those of you on 10, of course, this is just you're looking really more at some of the differences. Like you can see the persistent chat is over here on the left-hand side. The external access is now Federation external access, but really the rest of this, the naming is still the same. It's just that when you look at some of the different configurations, like if I choose Federation external access, you can see we have the XMPP federated partners over here. We get into our external access. We now have the SIP federated domains. The federated providers are separate from the SIP federated domains from a configuration standpoint. Under voice routing, of course, you still got the same 6 configurations that we have. So just different things that sort of a little things that might be different. And clients is definitely one of the areas that's going to be different because you can see in this case you've got a pure mobility and the push notifications that we did not have in 10. So just a little bit, again, just a simple overview of what we'll get into as we look at, but this is sort of our environment. Oh yeah, here, let me show you the topology. So if you look at our topology, you can see in this case, here we go, here's our London front-end server. So at the moment it's retrieving the status of it, but the replication is good. And if we look at our front-end server, there we go. So it just took a little bit to load everything up. So here's our Redmond front-end server. As you can see, it shows you the site names, which is sort of nice. We got a lot of stuff in running. Here's my Edge server. Here's my group chat server, so persistent chat server. And again, we've got our SQL servers here and our Office Web Apps server as well too. A lot of times you're going to see in here, as you'll notice that in the status replication, some of the things, if they're actually not running any Lync services, they're not going to have any status, nor will they have any replication, but they will be listed in here. To give you an example, these two right here, these are our SQL servers. So it's sort of nice that they are listed as part of the site, but they're not running any Lync services. There's a SQL server, so therefore there's nothing to replicate out to them, and of course there's nothing from the status of the server standpoint. To see which services, like say if something was wrong, you could always just go ahead and double click or click on the service status out there. You can just double click on this, give it a couple seconds to load up, and if I scroll down a little bit, you can see each one of the actual services that you defined in the topology builder, which we'll get into. Define the topology builder. In this case, you can see, okay, great, everything's running or something's not running. If something wasn't, like if I went under action here and stopped this service, you'll notice it goes from a little green circle with a play button on it to a red circle with a white square. And if I go back up to the regular view, you notice I now have a little triangle. So one of the things you can get used to, of course, is topology is just coming in very quickly, either through the management shell or in here and actually see, okay, what is the status and what is the replication. Now, you either can double click on it again, or in some cases, actually, you can just go under action, you say install services here. One of the things you'll find, of course, in here is the fact that with Silverlight installed, you can't right click on anything, so that becomes a little something you've got to get used to. So, give it a couple of seconds in this case, and hopefully our conference server should come back up, and I should go back to the regular computer icon with the green little circle and the play button on it. So. Also, the reason why you have a refresh button up here. There we go. So we're back. So let's get into this. Again, we'll take a look at sort of our from our configuration as we look at sort of the new functionalities and new features that are changed definitely from either OCS or 10 into 13. So from an OG standpoint, we'll take a look at sort of the communicating and connecting, look at voice and video. Obviously, the ability to have multiple devices, and of course some of the collaboration features that we'll get into. So from a new standpoint, one of the things that you're going to see, especially with 13 versus 10, is in 10, while you had a lot of different devices you could connect, you had your mobile edition, you had the phone edition, you had the Lync client itself, you had the Lync attendee, you had the Lync attendant, you had something, of course we get into Mac as well too, so you ended up having, 6, 7, 8 different clients, and each one looked a little different. And so even some of the functionality was a little different on that part of it. So one of the things you're going to see in 13 is the fact that regardless of which client you're using, mobile edition, web edition, phone edition, the client itself, you're going to see that really the same. You're going to have the same sort of look and feel all the way through everything. And it's one of the things that they really tried to do is regardless of which edition, it's just okay, great. The icons are the same icons. They're not different. I have most of the same functionality depending on what it is. Which one I'm connecting with, but it's sort of the same look and feel. If you think about it, some of you probably have never actually had formal Office training, but we all know, cut, copy, and paste from the icons in Word. In this case, some of us know Control X, C, and V from that configuration. So it's just you've learned that over years, and so or time. And so literally going in and just doing it here, it's okay, great. I do it on one client. I can go to the other client and still sort of figure out where everything is with maybe a couple things missing because it's a different client on a different platform. But that was sort of one of the things that they get into from the standpoint of the Lync client. Also from the standpoint that really you can change your views, and that's one of the things that might take a little bit of end user training just for them to get used to the fact that it's not just the one view that you have anymore, where you can sort of see from here. If we look at this, while they have somebody drilled out here, from to look at their contact information, but they notice they've got pretty much all the other pictures up here across the top, and they've actually got some instant messaging going on in this case. Here, somebody's actually sharing their content. So like I'm doing, I'm sharing my desktop, and you're viewing that. But notice that we have the video feeds up here. So there's 5 video feeds plus yourself, plus everybody else is in the conference. And if you choose to, you can actually pull out this, and so it actually sort of has your own configuration. We do support the higher definitions from a standpoint of not only the pictures themselves. If you get into Exchange 13 and Lync 13, your pictures actually are hosted in Exchange. They're not hosted in Active Directory. But you've got to have Exchange 13, you've got to have Lync 13, you've got to enable that part. And instead of being like 123 by 123, if I remember, it's something like 460 by 460 or something like that. So you can actually have a bigger and high definition picture. You get into, of course, the high definitions from video as well too. So you're getting into 1080p, whereas if you go back to Lync 10, you had 720p. So you actually have the whole high definition range that we can get into, and obviously connecting back to your web conference rooms or something else like that. So it's sort of one of the things that is you'll see is once your end users get used to it, that they can very quickly start with just an instant message, move into conferencing, move into sharing my desktop or sharing a specific poll or web page in that case. So which gets us into sort of here is, again, it doesn't really matter which type of device that you're using. You can get in and go and you can see the contact list that we have just in the client in this case, somebody sharing their desktop, but you can see it looks a little bit different from a mobile device. It's still sort of the same functionality. You still have the same icons down here that we're used to here in this case, and that was sort of one of the end goals, was making sure that this was the same look and feel as much as possible within the different concepts that you have. The Connect Anywhere part, and this is like, for me, is what I would call, you guys actually having to do a little training with your end users, is some of the things just in conversing or allowing them to go in and look at things. I'm going to bring mine over for a moment. I'm going to minimize this for a moment. Let me minimize my desktop, and I'm going to pull this back over. Okay, and if you look at it, you're looking at my side of the conference right now. Okay, and as we look at my side of the conference, I had some fun. I put the participants up here, so you can see right now there's a couple of set of presenters. You can roll over somebody and see their contact information. We could scroll down and see all the guests, which you can as well too. Here's sort of the running instant message that we have down here along the bottom. But then you've got different views. So like, notice I'm looking at the stage right now. But if I come down to the lower right-hand corner, you can see I can actually click on the drop-down and I can change this to a speaker view where I'm just seeing the speaker right now. A presentation view allows me just to see the presentation, or compact view, which means I can sort of compress it or don't show the stage in this case. And there are other options as well too by the little ellipse that we click on it. So the little ellipse, as you click at it, somebody can record. We can actually manage recordings. I can define the meeting entry info. So what's the phone number we're connecting into? What's the actual URL? If I click on the link for this case, here's the options, and you can see from the options, who can actually get in or has to be waiting in the lobby. Do I want to announce when people leave? Who's going to be a presenter? Who's going to, we can annotate presentations. Like right now, it's only me. And of course, then who can actually? This is sort of cool. Who can look at content on their own? This is sort of nice. I don't know if you guys noticed, but if you're in somebody else's conference, you can actually slide through their PowerPoint slides on your own. You can actually look at them, and it doesn't affect the actual presenter. I know you might believe it in this case, but it's sort of fun to go through. You're like, hey, check this out. You can go through all their slides. So that's a fun little one to find out. And of course, then obviously end the meeting. End the meetings, be careful about that, because when you do end a meeting, unless this is a repetitive meeting, at that point, the Lync will actually mark that content for deletion. And so, if you got any handouts or things that are up that are actually in the conference, that content gets to, get marked. And again, after the default configuration, it actually will start to purge the data on your file store. So that's sort of if you look at just sort of the changes that we have here. Also, if you look down on the lower left-hand corner, again, this is just, here's my instant messaging, here's my audio. So notice I can put it on mute or I can hold. If I go to the video, if we actually had it up, I could preview my video. So there'll be a little video feed of me here. And then I can actually say start my video, so you can check yourself out to make sure that you look good and there's nothing behind you, and then you can actually join into your conference instead of if you think about it in 10 and OCS, when you clicked on the video icon, it automatically brought you up, so you can sort of preview yourself. One of the big changes would be this one, would be the fourth icon, and you can see sort of like the PowerPoint side. What's being presented, like right now I'm presenting my monitor, but notice I can do all my monitors. Primary monitor, secondary monitor, I can do a specific program, whiteboards and polls, PowerPoints. So it's just a little bit different, and again, you can see we can actually manage the content, like again, the PowerPoint sides are up here, or hide the stage as well too. Notice that it's just one part, because again, notice we've got up here OneNotes, so I could actually do just OneNotes for myself, or if I want to share this with everybody, notice I could actually click on the shared notes, and we could actually have a running conversation. Everybody could actually combine in on the notes. And of course, one of the ways to do attachments is if you click on the attachments, just click on the add attachments. You can do the same thing literally by just dragging it into this window right here. So if you just left click on a document and drag it down here, then it will automatically make an attachment as well too. And of course, then here's our participants. Notice that I can go in, as you can see, you can unmute the audience, load a video, we can hide names, everybody can make everybody an attendee very quickly. And of course, then the participant list is the participants list that you're looking at right now. So it's not that it's that much of a change, but there's definitely some things that you're going to want to do a little bit of end user training from a configuration standpoint. So just different parts, depending what you get into. But like I said, it's not that it's overwhelming, but it's definitely not you don't want to find out the first time you have to do a conference in front of everybody at your office and going, okay, wait, which icon does which? So. But take a little time in this case, figure out the different parts and punch from there. But remember, a lot of this is going to be based off of your conference policy. So what you allow them to do. Will they be able to do PowerPoint? Will they be able to do video? Will they be able to have call-in? Will people be able to bypass the lobby or not bypass the lobby? So those are things that when we talk about Connect Anywhere in Office, yeah, we got all sorts of things within the conference itself. And then the other side of this is if you've got it configured, it sounds sort of strange, but you can actually start in Word or PowerPoint or Excel, and if you go up to the actual ribbon and again we're talking Office 2010 or 2013, is literally you can start a conference from Office. So that's sort of one people might not know about that. Literally just open up Word and go back to the ribbon in this case, create a meeting and off we go. So that's another one to get into, but it's very quickly, as you can see, we can go from an instant messaging to, hey, let me drop in video over here, or let's have a conversation, let's invite a few other people, let me share my desktop or share a program, and off we go. So the main window has changed a little bit from versus what you're used to in 10, and a big difference, obviously, from OCS days. The presence, of course, is now over here on the left-hand side, and you'll notice, of course, if we click a little drop-down arrow right here, that you can make yourself available, not available, do not disturb, be right back. If you have this integrated with your, let's say, mapping configurations for Exchange, then at that point, this can actually change depending on what you've got scheduled. So like if you're in a conference or if you're in well, it's a web conference in this case, you're in a meeting, that availability will change automatically if you allow that through the configuration. Again, that would be something you would click on the cog over here and actually make the setting changes on that part of it. This is another one of the visual clues, so if you're not used to working with Lync too much in this case, but depending on how many different icons you have up here, you can tell that if people are enabled for persistent chat, if they're enabled for enterprise voice, just by looking at some of the icons. And of course then, down here at the bottom you can see again, is someone not available, they're off known in this case, but look at this. It now tells you whether or not they're, as you can see, mobile, video ready. So you actually have the ability to go in and, and say, hey, they got video. Hey, we could actually do a video feed. Or, okay, hey, I know Peter's out, he's on a mobile device, but at least we can still get a hold of him potentially. So, call forwarding in this case, so notice down here, again, if you got some of the settings for your voice policy, voice features in this case, if those have been configured, you actually will have all those different options to show up. So a lot of different icons or different things that, again, as you start working with the product, you can sort of look at just the end user client and go, okay, you're not configured for that, or, okay, we need to figure out what's going on because you're supposed to have that. So it's a little different than just the look in this case of it. The context view, as you roll over somebody, they're focusing specifically on, again, you can actually group them by your status or relationship in this case. One of the things, of course, is you have the standard 6 levels of which you can define what people can see as clients within your environment. So again, if you go to right-click on somebody, you can actually go in and set the level. It doesn't show it right here, but set the level of which an individual can be set at. So. They're showing, of course, specifically, again, you want to do an email message, schedule a meeting. You can pin them to your favorites, so if you want to add somebody. You can also, if you're doing an instant message with them, just left-click and drag them into your contact list, and that will make them a contact as well, too. As you can see, obviously, you had to remove them down here, and of course, then if you want to figure out the next time they are available, you could potentially go in and actually tag for change status. So when they do become available, you actually get a notification that, yes, that person is available. So here's another contact card on the other part of it. So when you actually click on the drop down, sort of like what we had in OCS, but a little bit more. Again, you've got to click on the little icon. But you can see from here we go. So contact, notes, organization, what's new, what memberships are part of. And you do get a little bit more information all within the contact card itself. It's not that we didn't have this in 10, it's just a little bit different. But again, sort of the calendar, you can see schedule a meeting, what their actual email address is. If you integrate this with your Exchange contacts, you actually can get a blended contact card. So let's say you have the person in Exchange as their formal business email address, but you have them as a contact in Lync with a personal instant message address or a SIP address. Okay, so when you actually look at this individual, based on if there's enough values, if you want to say, that match, when you actually look at the contact card for this individual, it actually will pull the contact information from both areas and display it for you, all within one contact card. Again, that is a Lync 13, Exchange 13 configuration that you've got to get into, but you can do what we call a unified contact store and take the contacts that you have from Lync in this case and actually put them into Exchange. So, and then you'll see a blended contact card from a configuration standpoint. So here's within the actual options of the Lync client. So again, you can see you can actually go in, okay, great, I want to really show the contact names in this case. Do I actually want to put them in, let's say, an alphabetical order or availability? And again, what should show on the list? Again, you wanted the contact's name versus their email address, the status. There's other areas. I mean, I know they're focusing specifically on the contact list, but you can see we can get into, okay, is this a personal, these two we've been used to. Those really haven't changed from, if you go back to LCS 01, from a configuration standpoint, they really haven't changed. Your pictures changed a little bit. In fact, actually, you know what, let me do this. Let's bring this down here for a moment, and let's bring up our contact here. So if we look at some of the clients here, let's do it this way. Okay, there are some decent changes in this. You can see that you can actually define logging down here at the bottom. If you want to minimize the notification area on the taskbar. Here's your tabbed conversations. This is a new change that we have. That by default, you now have what we call tabbed conversations, which means that as you're doing more than one instant message, it's all within the same one window instead of actually having multiple windows for each one. That was a change that you had in Lync 10. You could do that, but you actually installed, there was a configuration that you had to install to be able to do it. Here it's now just part of the actual contact itself. So again, if we look at the status, you can decide, again, how long do you want to be away before it shows you. Here's the picture. So again, you want to hide your picture, show your picture, the contact picture, or even a video picture that you get into. And again, you can see we get into your odd devices, your file saving, where you're going to save your files by default, and of course then your Lync meetings in this case. So just different options that you have within the client itself as you look at some of the different configurations. So, which gets into, here we go. So as we see, the object thing is to be able to go in, and the new term, of course, would be the UX in this case, or user experience over here. Is that it's the same look and feel regardless of which device you're on. One of the things that you're going to see in a conference is the fact that the video will be different depending on whether or not it's a one-to-one, so sort of a PDP video, where it's going to be a little bit more rectangle in this case. So you get more of the behind the scenes, what's the person look like, as well as a little bit more of the room that you're in. Whereas when you're in a conference, the video feed is actually very square, so it cuts down and focuses specifically on the individual versus the room that they're in. So a little bit more of again, sort of trying to make it a little bit more user-friendly, if you want to say, just more of the feeling of, okay, I see the individual, but I also see a little bit more of what's going on that part of it. So, but you can see in this case, yeah, it's very easy to move between devices. You really can forward between one location, to another. You got a phone call that somebody calls you at work in this case, but it's 5 o'clock, it's time for you to go. Click on the drop down, forward it onto your mobile device, wait for it to mull over, and take it from there. I can give you a perfect example. 2 months ago, I was up at San Francisco and was teaching a class from there, but the servers were back here in Irvine, where I'm at right now. I called the front desk here, and literally she's like, hold on a moment. She just goes in and opens up the Lync client in this case, and forwarded it to her cell phone, and then walked into the actual room, and I walked her through step by step what needed to be done. And it took maybe 5 minutes in total. Not for the transfer, but for her to transfer the phone, walk into the classroom, do the configuration they need, and we were back up and running in less than 5 minutes. So it makes it very easily to be able to move from one to another in this case once you've got it all built out in this case. Sort of moving focus in this case a little bit, looking at the persistent chats. Persistent chat, of course, is what we used to call group chat. Here's the new icon that you're going to see right here. And again, this will be your instant messaging in this case, missed messages, and of course your enterprise voice or phone on the right-hand side. But on this side, you can see that we have just the persistent chat icon. Number one, you're not going to see that icon unless you've been enabled for a room within persistent chat. And you can see over here on the left-hand side, you can actually start filtering it. So the number that you see right next to the icon, of course, is letting you know how many different, depending on what features you've set up, how many different keywords that are notified from what you actually configured, or those are just how many different posts have been actually in your rooms that you're actually part of. Take a look at, of course, the new, when you actually have the ability to see the chat rooms. In this case, if you click on the new part, you have to click on the icon first, but if you click on new, it will show you all the chat rooms that you have. You also can search right here. So depending on what kind of chat room it is, there's an open chat room, a closed chat room, and a secret chat room. Only people who are members of a secret chat room can actually search and find the actual conference. Anything that's secret in this case, you have to be a member of. You cannot search for a secret room. Open and closed in this case, you'll be able to search for, assuming that you're within the category that allows you to see. You won't be able to get into a closed one, but you can see the room name for that configuration. But over here in this case, like I said, if you click on the little cog right here, there is a feature which again allows you to go over here to create a filter, and you can see what's the name of your filter. Tell me when anybody posts, anyone except me, anyone specific people, or when you're looking for specific keywords down here along the bottom, you can actually go in and set this up from a configuration standpoint. So, and here we go. So sort of the whole presence level. Just as you can see, depending on how you've got them pinned, when you define somebody as a favorite, it really depends on when you pin them, what if you want to say SIP address that they're using. So in the case of this one, you can see we added contacts, in this case djohnson@hotmail.com. It's going to pin it as djohnson@hotmail.com. But if you go in and actually search by name and then pin off the gal, while you do have the djohnson@hotmail.com associated with an individual, it's actually going to pin them in this case as, you can see, djohnson@microsoft.com. So it really depends on how you pin them. When you make them a favorite, is what it's going to be actually looking for from a presence configuration. So that's something to be careful about from an end user standpoint. And if you look at what we've got up here, you can see they're in a conference call. In this case, they actually got, looks like 2 missed messages. In this case, you got 20, sort of 20 missed waiting in notifications there, conversations they haven't taken a look at. So, but it is a way to start to take a look at what you're actually doing. Notice it says Lync 15, by the way. That's actually the Wave 15, but this is Lync 13. So, here's sort of the conversation view, a little bit different, but as you, again, we looked at the icons within our conference, and again, when you click on the phones, again, you can actually start an audio call, or actually, turn off your audio if you choose to, mute it. Turn your camera on in this case, so when you actually click on the video, that allows you to actually see your video feed, and then you can say turn on my camera, which then allows you to actually bring in your video feed into the conference. We talked about, again, the different content that you can actually do. We've got a few more that are enabled versus what they show here. So you get the OneNote attachments, and again, what you're going to present. So, and of course, then the participant list. That is going to be a little bit of a change for people. People are used to, if you want to go back to Lync 10, even OCS days, is when you started a conference that the participant list was there by default. Those windows are not there by default anymore. So you're going to have to click on that icon just to show on the participants list. I'm almost got to the point where now when I open up a conference, one of the first icons I click is this one for the messaging and this one for the participants list. So it's just one of those things you sort of get used to when you've been using it enough times. But that may throw some of your end users off at first, especially if they're going from, let's say, 10 to 13. 10 participant list is there. 13, it's there. It's just not turned on or viewed by default. So. Here's the tab conversations. In this case, there are 3 conversations going here. And it is actually sort of nice. What will happen is even if you've got this minimized, you will get sort of this yellow shading that will pop up as part of the icon down in your taskbar. But when you bring up the actual icon, which is your Lync client, The ones that, of course, that anybody's actually doing an instant message that you've missed in this case or haven't seen would actually be highlighted with the same coloring. So you just click on that part of it and it actually would have the conversation there. So instead of having separate windows, which, if you're having quite a few conversations at the same time, it could be a little difficult. It's just what we now call one window, but it's tabbed. Like I said, this is something you could do within 10, but you actually had to install a little bit of configuration and actually set it up and allow the tab conversations. So, on the other side of conferencing, we get into video and our audio. From a video standpoint, here we go. So this is sort of the video preview, so you would actually see yourself. Notice that right now we're doing a one-to-one video configuration. It's probably one-to-one instant messenger we're going to bring video into. So when you take a look at your video feed, you're going to see that, again, there's a little bit more information around the background information, or if you want to say, just not only the individual, but you get a little bit more of a rectangle view versus a square view. And then, of course, when you click on Start the Video, you will always usually be on the right-hand side of all the different video feeds. By the way, if you actually enable, because you do have to enable the multi-view video feed, you can go in and actually right-click and pin video feeds. So otherwise what happens is if somebody doesn't speak for about 30 seconds, somebody else becomes an active speaker, it will switch the video feeds to the new speaker, and then the person who actually is no longer speaking will be listed as just their picture. It will not continue to keep their video feed unless they're one of your top 5 active speakers. So that'd be something that, again, it'll change, but you can go in, like I said, pin a specific user so that regardless of the other video feeds that might change, that specific user always stays there. Also, as a presenter, I can go in and right-click on my video feed in this case, and I can what I call spotlight. So I can spotlight my video so that all you can see is my video, so people can bounce back and forth between other videos. So there's lots of little options, again, from a standpoint of the video experience. You can get into high definition like we talked about. You get into what we call SVC, so it's going to be scaling video configuration. What happens is it's going to be a lot more depending on the bandwidth that the actual end user has. So regardless of how much bandwidth I have, I could be doing it at 1080p, high definition camera. But you may be sitting on Wi-Fi, with not much of a bandwidth configuration. Because of that, when you actually connect, one of the things that gets checked out is how much available bandwidth you have, and based off any kind of policies that we have, you might actually getting a CIF configuration from an actual video feed. Why? Because you don't have the bandwidth to be able to handle a 1080p. So that's one of the things that's changed in this case as you look at it is, again, we're looking at the H.264 format that we're now using. RT audio and RT video is still there, but the H.264 format is the one we're using for Lync 13, which allows us to scale this out. So you got people that connect with a low bandwidth, they're probably going to be getting CIF. You got some people with some decent bandwidth, they're going to get VGA. People who have unfettered bandwidth, in this case, are probably sitting on a high definition video feed that they can see. So it will scale depending on the actual client that connects in, not necessarily the presenter itself. So here's sort of the steps they just sort of go through. Here's a better example of again, sort of right now I know it's some pictures, but again, these would be video feeds. Here's you down here at the bottom, sort of previewing yourself until you actually say, okay, great, I'm going to put myself in. Notice that you are down here on the right-hand side, and of course these would be the other people. It looks like you've got a couple people here who don't have video on, but those would be the people that, if they had video, it would actually put up video. Otherwise, it's just going to be their picture. But it at least shows you the actual last 5 people, active people that were speaking in this case. So if you're doing video, it actually will do the video. If not, it's just, it's going to be the pictures of the individuals who's speaking, assuming, of course, that they have uploaded a picture. Otherwise, you do get something like Susan here, where it's just a blue square, or you've got the little pawn icon that shows up like the rest of these ones down here. But it just sort of show you this case, again, even below it, you can see that we've got sort of all the rest of the people in the conversation are there from a picture, if they have pictures. Otherwise, they're at least denoted by a representation. So. Then, of course, we get into the Office Web App Server. From using the Office Web App Server, again, one of the things we talked about a little bit earlier is this is going to be another one of those changes from 10 to 13. In 10, whether or not you realized it or not, when you connected to a conference, and let's say we're doing like I was just sharing my PowerPoint slides, what the clients actually were using was the PowerPoint viewer. Whether or not they realized it or not, but they were using the PowerPoint viewer, and the rendering of it sometimes wasn't that well. Again, you can sort of see it loading up line by line by line by line, and sometimes, of course, you click ahead a couple PowerPoint slides, and they're just waiting for it to load up. But they really were using the Office PowerPoint viewer to actually view the content. If you had any kind of audio embedded on it, forget it. It never played the audio. So getting back into the Office web app configuration, we start looking at just some of the configurations of now rendering this all is really sort of like what we do within SharePoint. So the ability to render this all within a web page. And like I said earlier, do not have to have the actual Office suite installed on your machine. Now, if you want to talk about licensing, you still have to have an Office license, regardless. If you have Office on the local machine, or if you're just using Office web apps within Lync or even SharePoint, you're going to need the Office. You're still going to need at least one Office license. You don't need any more than one, but you do need an Office license. So in this case, you can see we get into for a video standpoint. So again, your Windows Media Video as well as the H.264 for your video configuration. Notice we do have potentially up to 20 meg. Will be enough to play with. So you can mute everybody, so everybody can be muted. Kevin, it's going to depend on where you want to place the pictures in this case. If you're not running Exchange 2013, then your pictures will still be in Active Directory. So you can be on Lync 13, but Exchange, let's say 2010, and it will actually it's going to be sitting in Active Directory. You have to be on Exchange 2013 and Lync 2013 to have your pictures stored in Exchange. So let's kick out of this for a minute if you don't mind. I'm going to get out of the PowerPoint slides for a moment here. Let's go back and take a look at a few things here. Okay. Here's our front-end server. So one of the things, of course, that's going to be brand new for everybody, especially going from OCS days, is the topology builder itself. Okay. The topology builder, of course, and I'm going to minimize this for a moment. The topology builder is really where you and I start everything from a building standpoint. Once you've gone through, let's say, the prep configuration. So we've done our Active Directory prepperizations, we've done our schema prep, we've introduced our objects and objects and attributes, we've allowed that to replicate, we've done our forest prep. In this case, I'm just going to put test here to put this in. We've done our forest prep, which introduces our new groups, the security groups that we have, and then of course we've done our domain prep and let that replicate through. The next thing we have to do is we have to go and define the topology builder. Now, this is going to be a big change for anybody going from OCS to 13, is we didn't have a topology builder in OCS days. So to give you an example, if you were building out OCS, you answered all of the questions during the setup, and of course if you messed up the setup, then you had to basically start over during the setup configuration. So one of the things that they introduced with 10, and we've just continued on with 13, is what we call the topology builder. For those of you still on OCS and going to 13 or thinking about going to 13, think of the topology builder as taking all of the questions that you had in OCS during the setup and you're separating it from actually running the setup. And that's really what this is designed for. You're going to answer all the questions that you want, publish that information, and then by the time you actually run this setup to install the servers, you're just running setup. You're just watching it go through. Why? Because you've answered all those questions ahead of the actual setup part. So it's sort of separated the parts. Instead of you having to configure it while you're actually doing the setup, you're going to configure it ahead of time. Or afterwards, because that's one of the things that you can do with the topology builders, you can make changes to it. To take a look at this, again, for an OCS environment, if I expand out something like this is going to look a little bit more like what you're used to in OCS days. For those of you on 10 going to 13, in this case you can see the topology builder has changed as well too. You'll notice that we have Lync Server 2010 up here, as well as we now have Lync Server 2013. And then this looks a little familiar with what you're used to in 10. You can see we have the standard edition. Here's my enterprise edition in the pool. We have your director pools, your mediation pool, your persistent chat pool, which is what we used to call group chat, but remember that was a separate install, and your edge pools. Notice you have your trusted applications, but this is sort of a new section. Not the content within it, but it's this new section called Share Components. So you have your SQL stores, your file stores, your gateways, your trunks, which is a new configuration. It's sort of a combination of your mediation server, ports, protocols, and your PSTN gateways that you have separate here, but you configure within a trunk. And of course, then here we have our Office web app servers, and then you notice on top of it that we have the branch sites as well. So a little bit of a different change from a configuration that it's still sort of the same functionality. It's just a little bit different on how things are laid out within here. As you can see below, let me collapse a few things here from the from the Lync server, you can see we've got a bunch of shared components that really, regardless of how many different pools you have or sites that you have, you're going to be using the same components. So in the case of, like, okay, great, I'm going to be using the same SQL server for both my enterprise pools. So I don't have to go in and set up something like that where it's, okay, great, we're going to build a different pool, build a different configuration. Same thing with the gateways in this case. So depending on how many gateways you publish or define in this case, and we put it within a trunk, then you have the ability to go in and just connect to it. So they just sort of put it into a different configuration a little bit, but it's still the same functionality that we've had. Now, like everything else, of course, that we've done with 10 in 13, the minute you make a change, all you need to do is go in. You can multiple places you can do this. You can go in and actually right-click and publish your topology. Now, one of the things that's nice about 13's topology builder versus 10's topology builder, don't get me wrong, we could do most of the stuff here that we can in 10 as well too. But for those of you who have run across this before, you know how you've gone in and you've inadvertently added something like, say, maybe a PSTN gateway, and you haven't associated it with something yet. And in 10, if something wasn't configured right in the topology builder, you try to go in and right-click and publish, this would be grayed out. And you'd have a little, instead of the little, it's hard to see here, but you can see sort of the gray icon with the two arrows pointing at, you would actually have a little red circle. What's changed in this case for 13 is the fact that while you still have that red circle up there, it actually will drill down to the specific folder as well too. So say like I didn't have my SQL Server set up for mirroring, so I forgot the mirror port, that the shared components would have a little red circle on it. The SQL Server itself would have a little red icon on it, and then the actual SQL Server database would have an icon as well too. So it's a lot easier to go in and figure out, what did you miss versus in 10, some of the things we were sort of struggling sometimes. Like, okay, I know I've got something in here not configured because I don't have the option to go in and actually publish my topology. So that would be the change, again, from a configuration standpoint. If you look at sort of the topology itself. Once you publish that, of course, then we start going through your deployment wizard. It's still the same steps that you had in 10. So again, you would do your SQL Server Express is installed locally on the machine. It's going to grab a read-only copy of the central management store, place it on that machine. Then, of course, you go through the component services, so it adds or also remember that's the removing of the services. Then you install your certificates, start the services, and hopefully everything comes up right. You should be able to actually prompt in and take a look at your control panel once you're in here. From a backtracking a little bit, the force prep. If we go back and take a look at the force prep on our DC, it's still the same groups, but there are some new RBAC groups that come along with this. So when you do a force prep, you had all of this, the CS configuration, so CS administrator, CS archive administrator. Notice that we have a CS persistent chat administrator now. We also have a CS response group manager, so you can actually go in and give an individual, or I guess a group if you choose to, the ability to go in and manage one response group, not all the response groups. That would be the administrator right above it. Okay. You also have, of course, we still have our user administrator, server administrator, voice administrator. But that's sort of some of the new rollback groups that we have. In a smaller environment, you're going to make yourself a CS administrator. For those of you guys who are on OCS, and again, you're not used to looking at these sort of groups, think of it in OCS days. We used to come down here. And by the way, the groups are still here. But we used to come in here at the bottom, and of course you'd look at the RTC groups, and you'd find yourself looking at RTC Universal Server Admins. That would give you full rights to do everything in OCS days. Now what we do is these are really actually used by the services. Again, up on top was really where we put either the security groups or the individuals themselves. So in a smaller environment, while you look at all these groups and everything else, you're probably just going to make yourself a CS administrator and probably not much else. If there's only like 2 of you managing Lync, you're going to probably drop yourself both in as a CS administrator and not much more. In a bigger environment where, let's say, you're running national or worldwide, you can actually create your own customized RBAC groups, and specifically either a site or, let's say, like an OU, allow people to manage specific parts if you choose to. So you can delegate the roles if you want to. But it's definitely an area where it's all going to be based on how big your deployment is. Smaller environments, probably just CS administrator. And then depending on some of the configurations, you might end up still putting yourself back as an RTC Universal Server admins, depending on what we're getting into. So to give an example, in this case, you can see from a membership standpoint, notice I've got myself in there because some of the things we did for group chat or mirroring that I needed to have. So So a couple different things just from the RBAC groups when you do what we call what's called the force prep. Notice that these are universal security groups. Again, they cannot be global groups in this case, but there's universal security groups. If you do this from the deployment wizard, it will put it in the user's container automatically. If you do it from the management shell, from a scripting standpoint, you can place it in any OU that you want. So it's up to you from a deployment standpoint. So that's sort of our DC. Let's take a look at some of we talked about conferencing a little bit, so let's come back to conferencing. If we look at conferencing, I'm just going to double click and open up the global one here. You can see some things really haven't changed too much. It's still the same configurations that we had within 10, but this will be a little different obviously for OCS. You can see in this case we've got, again, sort of the maximum meeting size. Well, this is the default maximum meeting size for a Lync deployment. You can't have more than 250 people in a Lync conference. If you build off the regular specs for a Lync 13 conference, it would be one conference for 250 people. Now, there is a white paper out there that shows you actually how to build for a conference of up to 1,000 people on an on-prem conference, but you're talking about a separate pool from a configuration standpoint. So be aware that, again, you start planning for this, so that'd be something to be aware of. You can have more than just the one conference in this case. You can have a bunch of meetings for 25 or 10 people in this case, but you can only have one conference for 250 people. Yes, we still have allow participants to invite anonymous users. The recordings, or you can allow recordings or not enable recordings. Here's allow federated anonymous participants to record. Audio and video, a little bit different in this case. So again, enable just audio or audio and video. Here we go. So enable PSTN dial-in conferencing, and then allow anonymous participants to dial out. Some people don't understand what the dial out part is. If you ever gone to a conference where you get prompted to put in your phone number and then it calls like your desk phone, that's what this means. Okay, so it's not like you can call Hawaii from the conference in this case. It's that you're going to allow that to call you at a phone so you can actually listen to it. And then here you go. Here's the new area. Allow participants not enabled for enterprise voice to dial out. It used to be, again, you had to be enterprise voice enabled to actually use that dial-up configuration. So now anybody can actually do a dial-out. And here's the part we talked about earlier, allow multiple video streams. If that's not checked, then you have just the standard video feed that we're used to in OCS in 10 days. But if I allow multiple video streams, that allows up to 5. That's the most you can have, 5 video streams in a conference. Data collaboration, not too many changes in this case, but you can see enable data collaboration, enable yes or no. If you allow it, allow federated anonymous participants to download content, to transfer files. Here we go. Enable annotations, and this is the part, I don't know if you guys do this or not, but enable PowerPoint annotations. You may not want to tell your end users this, but in Lync 10, you actually could go in and actually write on somebody else's PowerPoint slides. That was sort of a fun one to run across. And of course, then the enable polls. From an application centering, you can see, again, are you going to enable it or disable it? Are you going to allow the participants to control or federated or anonymous participants? And then finally down at the bottom, here's your application desktop sharing, peer-to-peer transfer, enable peer-to-peer recording, and of course then allow participants to join with multiple video streams. So you've got all sorts of little options there's a couple changes. Like I said, a lot of changes for OCS, but minor changes in this case from 10 to 13. But that is sort of a global policy. Now, something else to talk about, just to make sure we're on the same page, and notice when I click on the little new button right here, I've got a site and a user policy. And of course, the one that's here by default is what we call the global policy. Like I said, just to make sure we're on the same page, be aware that potentially in some areas there's up to 4 different policies. The global one is in most areas. That affects everything within your Lync deployment. Okay, so that's the global configuration. If you define a site policy will override a global policy. Okay, unlike Active Directory where there's a blending of policies, as long as there is not a conflict, from reading them, that's not how it works in Lync. Lync, at whatever level you're at, is the policy you get applied. There's no blending of policies. So how it works is global is the top level. A site policy will override a global policy. A user policy will override a site policy and a global policy. So meaning in this case, if there's no site policy, but you define a user policy and you associate the user policy to the end user, the user policy will take precedence. Okay? There is a pool policy. It's not actually in conferencing in this case, but you can take some of the other areas, you'll find there's actually a pool policy as well too. The pool policy sits in between the site and the user policy. So the way it goes is the global is the top one, then the site, then the pool, then the user. Okay, and it's not blending like it is in Active Directory. It's whatever level you're at is the policy that you get. So it effectively is last policy read wins. So, So you could have a global policy where something like this, instead of being, everybody can have a meeting for 250 people, we're going to say, guess what? Everybody can have a meeting for up to 10 people. Okay. Now, all the other options I left on, but then I could go and say for, down to a user policy, okay, great, let's go and create a user policy for 250 people, and give that to specific people on that part of it. Otherwise, by default, if they're not part of a site policy, then they can only have a conference for up to 10 people, and you can adjust it depending on what you get into. If you look at the meeting configurations, again, you can see we've got a global site and a pool. Notice there's no user configuration, but if we take a look at the global configurations, here is where we get into some of the changes as we look at down here, sort of the bottom. In your conferences, you can actually put in a logo, so you can actually have a little picture in this case that goes in. You can actually define a help URI, so there's actually a URI. So if you've got like a customized website that you want people to go to, you can actually put in a little help URI that actually be sent as part of the conferencing invite. The legal jargon, so again, your legal department can get into this and actually put in all of their legal content that you want to from a URL that will actually connect to their legal environment. And then you can actually put a little bit of a custom footer in this conference information as well too. So it's sort of customized a little bit from a conference configuration that you get into. The dial-in numbers is still the same in this case. The object being in this case is to be able to dial in the conference. You have to define a number, and of course then the line URI as well as the SIP URI. And I'm just going to double click and open up one of these. And you define in this case, so what's the display number, what's the display name, the line URI, of course, which is just like something else we define for enterprise voice, but the line you're going to make, this is the phone call you're actually going to make. The SIP URI that you're going to associate with it, notice it doesn't have to be SIP, colon, and then again, whatever you define. The pool that's associated with it, and of course then you can go in and actually add a primary language, which means that when you call into the conference, until you put in your PIN number, you'll be prompted in that language. If you do not do anything, like you don't respond, you can potentially put in up to 4 different languages here. And then you have to associate with a region. Now, if you haven't defined the regions, then you can do all this work, but you'll notice that the commit button will not be grayed out. Where you define the regions are actually all the way back over here in voice routing, under your dial plans. If you open up a dial plan, in this case, you can see right here we have what we call dial-in conference region. You have to define this. So this is something to think about for some of you who are not going to be going to enterprise voice. I know some of you are actually going to probably maybe connect to a PBX system that you're still using on-prem. You might be connected to a Cisco solution or a VI solution or something like that. They like to call a third-party solution. Where you're not actually using the enterprise voice part of it. But if you want to support dial-in conferencing within your Lync environment, you will have to actually sort of build some of your actual enterprise voice configurations. You have to have a dial-in region to associate the number in this case. So under plans, you define the region, then you go back into our conferencing and define actually the phone number that associates with that region here. Be aware that the typing spells in this case only cancel this for a moment. If you look at obviously the London versus the Redmond sites, and you'll notice if I go to Redmond and take a look at it, notice I have a US region. I don't have a UK region, but a US region. The spelling matters because watch, if we go back to conferencing, I go back to my dial-in access number. Okay, I click on the new button, and I'm just going to scroll all the way down to the bottom and take a look at this. So I click on add, you notice that both regions show up. If you go in and you're going to have the same region for all of your different dial plans, and let's say you do all uppercase for one and all lowercase for another, those are considered 2 different regions. So be aware that you have to make sure you match the configuration. Otherwise, you have potentially 2 different regions. So that would just be something to be aware about from a configuration. The PIN policy, again with conferencing, which has changed here in this case, but you can see just to follow the minimum PIN length that you have, specify the maximum log attempts, enable a PIN or expiration if you choose to, and of course then a history count. The common pattern down here at the bottom allows you to you can allow pins of like say 11111 or numerical order like 3 4 5 6 7 in this case would be what the common patterns are down here along the bottom. But just different parts of sort of the conferencing area as we're hosting a conference right now. Be aware the PIN policy here is managed through Lync. You'll also find it underneath security. So if you click on security over here, you'll notice that the PIN policy, it seems to be the only area in Lync that actually it's listed in 2 different areas. But this PIN policy that we're looking at here is managed through Lync, where if you get into Exchange Unified Messaging, that is managed by Exchange. 2 different pins, 2 different applications. No, they're not synchronized together. Okay, so while you can start the user having the same pin in this case, but if you go and have them reset the pin, it's going to be completely different. So that's something to be aware about, that it's 2 different, those don't sync together. So pins for conferencing, which is also, by the way, your phones, and of course then you get pins for Exchange Unified Messaging. So. Persistent chat. You know what? Let's come back and take a look at this. Persistent chat here, if we take a look at this, once it's configured, and again, you're going to have to start at the topology builder first. So if we go back and take a look at the topology builder for a moment, let's take a look at our pool here. In our pool, actually, you need to go and define your persistent chat server first. So if we go in and right-click on pchat pool, persistent chat pool, you can see in this case you're going to define, is it multiple computers within a pool or a single computer within a pool? And I'm just going to click on the one we've got here. And we'll edit the properties. And what it's going to ask you for, of course, is what's the name of the persistent chat pool, what's the port number you're using, and here's where we start getting into focusing the first time enabling IP4, but also notice we have enabled IP6. If you're doing IP4 and IP6, the recommendation is, of course, that you turn both of them on. You don't go to a pure IP6 environment first. Most networks are not in a pure IP6 environment yet. So because of that, you're probably going to want to go in, and you can use IP6, but the recommendation is that you actually still leave on 4 and 6 from a configuration standpoint. By default, in this case, you can see you're going to need a SQL store for persistent chat. Again, generally that is actually installed differently on a different environment from your backend servers. Could be co-located, yes it could, but again, depending on how much chat you're doing, you're probably going to keep those away from the actual real databases. So we have a SQL store. I've got a configure for mirroring in this case as well as a witness. We'll talk a little bit about this later on. But you also have a compliance. So notice we've also got that one set up for mirroring and a witness as well too. But the compliance is basically a backup of the database. So that while you actually have the chat service itself and the chat database, you actually have a compliance, so it's another set of databases. So if something goes wrong, at least you have everything still backed up. You also need to define what we call a file store. So you've got a file store in this case, because some content actually gets put out in the file store, or some pointers that go back to the actual content database. And of course, then you need to tell it actually, in this case, the next hop, which usually is going to be your front-end servers, or a pool if you're doing the enterprise edition. Once you define that with your topology, of course, you'll go and actually publish this. Then you and I will go to the persistent chat server, and it's the same setup that we've been used to. Step number 1, SQL Server Express, read-only copy of the central management store. 2 is the actual components. 3 is the certificates. 4 is actually starting the services. And once you've got the services up and running, you and I will come back over here, and you'll click on persistent chat. If you don't have the actual server up, and to give you an example, if I go back over here and show you that, here's my persistent chat server. Okay, so if we look at the services, I'll just bring up the services console here really quick, and we'll go down and click on Lync. Okay, you can see in this case, here we go. So centralized logging agent, here's the persistent chat server itself, as well as the persistent chat compliance servers running, and the replicate or replicate agent. The replicate or replicate agent, since we're here, that's what actually replicates out that information, so that when all of your servers get notified that there's been a change, like you make a change in anything, like our conferencing, response groups, external access, you modify anything, it's a modification to the central management store. The central management store will use this service to notify the other servers so they can actually go back and get the changes and then get themselves up to date. So these need to all be installed here, and again, I'm going to minimize this. And to show you an example of what I mean by up to date, go back to the topology and you're looking for those green check boxes. That means that those servers have the latest version of our central management store. Let me show you an example. Again, very quickly, I can go in and let's see where we want to go. This is fun. We'll do a conferencing. Meeting configuration, we'll go in and say new pool configuration. We'll choose our pool. We'll go in and we'll change this to none and click on commit. Okay, so I made a change there. If I go back to the topology, do you notice I now have 1x, 2x's in this case, but these two are to date? Okay, so it's just a matter of, like I said, I made a change to the central management store. I did it through here, through the control panel. And again, if we get a couple of seconds in this case, it should be actually, notice it's already up to date. Okay. What you're getting into is one of the changes that we have from, if you want to say Lync 10 plus is so one of the terms you guys are going to hear. 10 plus means either Lync 10 or 13. But what that means is in OCS days, you and I really were dependent on Active Directory for replication. And in Lync 10 and Lync 13, while there still is some group policies that we have within Active Directory, most of it is now within the central management store. You make changes to the central management store, it notifies the Lync servers get the information, and they update themselves automatically. And so we're not as dependent on the replication of your environment, meaning Active Directory environment, You're just now really, in some cases, just depending on it actually to replicate the information out that you published. Making a modification here in the control panel does that. Making a modification, publishing information here in the topology builder does that. One of the things that we can have some fun and say whether or not you guys are good on typing is you can also notice that we have the management shell. Okay, the management shell, you've got hundreds of commands of which you do within the management shell are actually changes to the central management store as well too. So any one of these three tools we can use to configure, manage, modify, but again, it will be potentially an updates to your environment. To give an example of one really quick, if I go in and do let's change this. Make this a little bit bigger, you guys can see this. Okay, so if I go into something like this, let's say like get CS, client. Let's go back into like a little client policy here. Okay, let me scroll back up. I typed in get-cs CLI and I just hit the tab key a couple times. PowerShell, of course, you have the again the auto tab. So if you hit the tab key, it'll go through your commands. I just said get client policy. I didn't define a specific identity, so it kicked out and gave me the global one by default. But you can see over here, as you look at this, one of the ones that people always have to deal with, of course, is the address availability. Are we just going to do a web search or going to allow them to download it? But you can see we can go and disable counting information, emoticons, feed tabs, free and busy information. If I scroll down, you can see there's all sorts of enables that we can get into. Right now, of course, here's your display photo, so we're doing all photos, but you can do a specific configuration of that if you choose to, as well as things like, maybe hot desking timeout. The fact that you actually can log on to a house phone, it becomes your endpoint until you log out, would be an example of a hot desking timeout, as well as getting into your SharePoint configuration. So you've got your search internal, external configurations you get into. All of this, from a configuration standpoint, are things that we can do within the management shell. Okay? None of this is something that I can actually go back here into the control panel and do. So there are some areas that the only way really for you to go to make any kind of changes is within the management shell. There are other areas that you can do in the management shell or within the control panel itself. So that's going to be difficult for some people, not getting used to or not typing really well. They're like, give me everything in the GUI interface. It isn't necessarily always going to be that way. It'll be something that, again, there's some things, a lot of stuff we do for LIS, Location Information Services, are within a management shell. Or if you get into the E911 configurations, to publish some of that stuff, you're doing it through the management shell. There's nothing within the control panel to do that. So it's just more of an FYI, but be aware that, there's some things that, you're going to have to do it in the actual management shell. But coming back to persistent chat, once you've got the server actually running in this case, if you didn't have it running, what will happen if you click on persistent chat, you'll get an error right up here. It'll tell you that the service isn't running. I know the service is running because I'm not getting any errors. And then here's where you start. You start in what we call categories. Categories are think of them as sort of the boundaries in this case. So if I go in and define a new category here, okay, number one, you have to choose the service, and this is the server that we've got up and running. So there's my London site, my LON persistent chat server. What I want to call the category, and then these are sort of some default configurations. Think of creating chat rooms in persistent chat as sort of a two-level process. The first level is the category, and then inside the category, you put the chat rooms. Okay, so right now we're looking at the category itself. So let's say I want to do, Lync training or something like that. We'll put in training here. Okay, so again, I put in, training for Lync configurations. Now, what we're doing here is these three options that we have, these are sort of the global configurations. When someone creates a chat room, do you want them to enable invitations, which means if you enable this, that means the minute they add somebody as a member of that chat room, they will get an invite saying, congratulations, you're now part of this chat room. Are you going to allow them to upload files into the chat room? You may or may not want to. And do you want to enable chat history? By default, chat history is 30 days, by the way. Okay. So those are three options that you have from the category view. Now, you'll notice if we take a look at this, you now have allowed members, you have denied members, and you have creators. Okay? Anybody who you make a creator has the ability to create a chat room within this category. So like if I go in and add, let's say, Adam, that's one of the ones we're in here looking for. We'll find him, we'll add him, in this case, we go through. We're going to get over here, we can close this. Okay, so notice Adam's in here as a creator. Now, you'll notice if I scroll back up, you notice that Adam's also in as a allowed member. You can't really be a creator and not have membership to the actual category. Okay, so in this case, you could go in. I put in one individual. You could go in and add by security group if you choose to. Like again, you want to put in help desk, or you want to put in, sales or whatever you choose to. But you can add from. I just did one individually, but you can add per group if you choose to. Denied members override the allowed members. So say specifically, I wanted. We're going to put like sales in here, but I don't want IT to be in here. So I put in the IT security group under denied members. In this case, and put in sales as allowed members. So if someone is actually part of both groups, because they're on the denied list, they will not have access. Okay. What you're getting into is what we call the ethical boundary. You can define a category and then make sure that people can't get into that room. Okay. And that's where you get into, again, sort of the boundary configurations of this. So allowed members allow people to go in and actually see the chat rooms in this case. The creator allows them to go in and actually create chat rooms. Denied, of course, as you can see right there in the middle, denied overrides the allow. Okay? And so they won't be able to actually get into the category, which means you're not going to be able to see the rooms. Okay? So when you click on the commit button, that defines our category and gives those rights. The add-in that's right next to it, so I'm just waiting for this to create through. The add-in is if you wanted to actually add in like a URL to something to that, let's say that room. So when someone creates an actual chat room, they can actually go in and say, I'm going to add in, a link to this website or a link to this document in this case. And what will happen is when they actually go to the chat room, then it actually loads that up on the right-hand side of the window, so sort of in the body section. But you can click on Add In, and this would just click on Add. What's service? And again, you can see just what's the name and what's the URL. So what's the path of the actual content that you want to render within that chat room? You have policies, so if we come back to the policy, notice that we've got a global one by default, but there is the 4 other levels, or 3 plus the one for global. And again, are you going to enable persistent chat? At what level are you going to enable it? So that's just the policy. And if you go back and take a look at the configuration is where you define, and I'm just going to open up the global one, the default history, and again, you can see it's 30 days. Maximum upload files is 20 meg by default. The participant update limit, which means you can have up to 75 people by default in a chat room. And of course, then down here at the bottom, some of you might have a third-party solution where you actually go in and build customized chat rooms. You can actually put in the URL link right there where it says room management URL to actually connect to your customized environment if you choose to. That's not a room management within actually Lync itself. You're connected to your third-party solution. So at that point, that's really sort of it from a configuration within the control panel. The rest of this, you either like creating a chat room, actually would be either through the management shell, or if we had our user up, which it may not be long enough. Let's see what happens. Let's go back to our London client for a moment. Yeah, see, I don't have the persistent chat icon up here. Let's go ahead and sign out for a moment. It may not be long enough. Persistent chat takes a little bit to build out. What we're looking for, of course, is that persistent chat icon to show up. So we'll have them sign in and see whether or not we get the icon. If not, we'll let it run. We've got a little bit here. And we'll go in. But normally in this case, you've assigned, in this case, we assigned Adam the ability to create chat rooms within the category. So Adam, through his client, would actually then click on that link. So right, so see now I now have that icon right here. So if I click on that one, yeah, it's not, if you get this error here where it says your chat room access may be limited due to an outage, if you've literally just built this, then it's not finished building out the whole persistent chat environment yet. Okay. Now, if this is something that you're seeing later on, you've had persistent chat running up for months, yeah, that's a bigger story right now. But at the moment, I literally just enable it. So in this case, it's not quite building everything, so I'm just going to let that run. And we'll come back and take a look at that maybe a little bit later on. So it's definitely a new area is the whole persistent chat configuration versus the sort of what we had looking at conferences. So let's go back to PowerPoint side here. So we talked about, again, the Office Web App Server. That would be the other part. Again, you would actually go in and install the Office Web App someplace. You can use a standalone edition if you choose to, or you can go in and you can use the SharePoint configuration. So you would define that, actually. Let's take a look at that. So if we go back to our topology builder here, let's go back up to our front-end pool. And if we look at our front-end pool, let's just edit the properties of it. Okay. Depending on what you get into, you can either navigate over here on the left-hand side, so general resiliency, web services, mediation server, or if I scroll down here a little bit, you can see we've got our conferencing and the dialing conferencing. Here's enabling enterprise voice. Here's our association for our SQL server. Remember, if you're doing the enterprise edition, you need SQL. If you're installing the front-end server, oh, I guess people can't hear. Front-end server, in this case, standard edition, then you've got the standard edition install SQL Server Express automatically. If you scroll down a little bit to where we get into the file store part, from a file store standpoint, you can see that number one, you find the file store, but here we go, associated pool with the Office Web App Server. Okay, so when you define it, in this case, I'm just going to click on the new button. You define in the actual FQDN of the server itself. So let's say you've got a SharePoint deployment. If you've got a SharePoint deployment in this case, then you can just put in your SharePoint path. Otherwise, in this case, like we're doing, let's say WAC, Web Application Companion Server, .adatum.com or something like that. Notice that it puts in, this is just the FQDN of the server, and yes, it has to be the FQDN, but notice that it puts in the entire path for us. Most environments, it's going to be, again, hosting /discovery after the actual configuration of it. There is sort of an interesting little checkbox right here, if you notice, though, because it says Office Web App Server is deployed in an external network that is perimeter or internet. There really are different ways in which you can deploy out that. With this configuration, what you get into is this, is you're going to leave this unchecked if most of the end users that are going to connect to this application server are on your network. Now, if you're doing a lot of, let's say, on-prem conferencing, but most of your users are external, then you're actually going to deploy your Office Web App Server in the perimeter. So you would check this checkbox so that how it's configured in this case is it would know that a lot of this is actually coming into your server. It's just it knows a lot of it's going to be external. So that's what that checkbox means in this case, is really where is the actual Office Web App Server? Is it internal on the network because most of your users are going to be internal and they're connecting internal, or is it in a perimeter zone or even the internet configuration? So if you're doing, let's say, a hosted version for like Office 365, where you would actually place it out there. What it gets into is actually how it builds the actual URLs. Because what happens is when, let's say, like this conference this morning, when they uploaded the PowerPoint slides, in order for you guys to download those PowerPoint slides or see the PowerPoint slides, there's actually a URL link to the file store of where this content is stored. So you're actually not looking at that part of it, so it copies it out over to the actual Office Web App Server, renders it so you actually can see it within your browser. Now, right now, I'm sharing my desktop, so you actually it's not using that configuration, but this is sort of the configuration of how you, once you've got your Office Web App Server up and running, it's actually how we link this to your pool. So when you look at it in this case, I'm just looking at my pool. You can see we can sort of scroll down. I've got a lot of stuff configured here, but if we go down to look at our conferencing, here's our mediation server. Actually, go back to our residency right here. So our Office Web App Server is right here. So sort of the configuration, again, sort of looking at really sort of the Office Web Apps part. New part, again, you pretty much going to have to install it, especially for PowerPoint slides, the embedded audio within a PowerPoint slide, and allows you to use, that part. Plus your video also goes through this as well too. So it's definitely worth having in this case. Notice you can use it with the 10 clients as well too, but you get into it. The web edition, which actually a lot of you guys are doing right now, you can see it doesn't matter what we're using. Well, I guess it is in some of the browsers, but it's sort of a busy slide. But you can see we get into, okay, great, we're doing Firefox, we're doing Safari, we're doing Chrome over here in this case, what's supported, what's not supported, versus but we do have support obviously for, IE8, IE9, IE10 we're getting into. But the big change, if you want to say, with just the web edition itself, in 10, we did not have any audio or video within it. So with Lync 13, with the web edition, there's a plugin that you have to install that allows you to literally now have everything within the web edition. So that's the only thing you'd have to install, would be the audio or that plugin, so that you have the audio video within the web application. This was definitely if you want to say, a pain point, because you had the attendee version in Lync 10. So you had the Lync client, which actually had everything, or you had the Lync attendee. The attendee didn't, you had to install as well too. But the web edition that you had within 10 didn't support audio video. And so that was a a big frustration because people didn't have the ability to install anything, so they didn't install the attendee. So they used the web edition, but the web edition didn't support audio or video, so then they had to like call into the conference or try to figure out how to get the Lync client or the Lync attendee installed. So that's a nice change to the fact that, again, the web edition, as long as you install that plugin, allows you to get the audio and video without actually having to install anything. So you can, as we looked at this a little bit earlier in the conferencing, one of the fun things that a presenter can do, literally mute the audience. Or, like I said, I could go and actually spotlight the video, but it does allow me to go and mute the whole audience in this case, or any presenter could do that. As you saw, we could go in and I could unmute, mute, in this case, upload videos. We literally can go and change it to whiteboard or a poll page, just from a configuration standpoint. So, also you drop and drag stuff in automatically. So, like I said, I have a presentation or something I just want to upload. I can drag it into the conference and everybody would have attachments there. Be aware that if you are going to do this for what we call an on-prem conference, you will have to get into a reverse proxy. If you have anonymous users or you have users that are outside your network that are connecting in, so federated or remote users, in order for them to download that content from your conference that's being hosted on-prem, you will need a reverse proxy. And a reverse proxy, of course, is publishing the internal URLs that you're using so they can actually get to this content. Otherwise, they'll be able to click on the link that allows them to download the content, but they're going to get an error because their client doesn't know the path back to it. One thing we'll talk a little bit later on is the edge server. In order for you to connect to anything in the outside world, for those of you coming from, OCS environments, we still have the edge server, but you've got an edge server configuration that we've got set up in order to do any kind of, remote users, federation, PIC, XMPP now, of course, is now through the edge server. So you have to have at least one of those, or obviously high availability. But looking at this, remember that edge server just manages, or even an edge pool, just manages the SIP signaling. So anything from an HTTP or HTTPS request, that's going to have to go through your reverse proxy. Okay, and so you will have to have what we call a reverse proxy, like a TMG or a gateway that you actually publish the path, the internal URL path. So here's sort of solutions, just sort of looking at again sort of those endpoints. A little round table here, a couple of things, video, audio. So, promo slide. Then we get into mobile devices. So one of the changes, of course, that we have is finally, with the mobile devices, you can actually make a phone call with the mobile device. That was sort of a fun thing to run across in this case with Lync 10 is, you're like, hey, we got a mobile division. So, and they brought it out just before Christmas, about, a year and a half ago. But when you looked at it within 10, it really was just instant messaging. And so now, if you follow Lync 13 mobile edition, you can get prompted, do you want to use your phone provider or do you want to actually make a phone call through Lync? If it's enabled, of course, but it allows you to start making phone calls. And you can do a tablet over here on the left-hand side, or obviously we're using a Samsung here in the middle. But sort of the same look and feel, at least, the icons, the pictures, the function. A bit different than what you get into a desktop versus a mobile edition, but you can still see the context in this case and the information. They're just showing that we looked at a slight hiccup. So, but all right, can everybody hear me? There we go. All right, Yeah, it looks like a slight hiccup. I mean, it happens every once in a while. So, but I mean, you can see how quickly I was able to reconnect back in, and we just move on. So, but just sort of it's going to happen every once in a while. But whether or not you guys realize it or not, I'm actually on Wi-Fi at the moment. I'm actually not connected directly to a LAN configuration. So, cool. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, so getting back into our mobile devices, that we do have support for the mobile configuration. So. So, from a conferencing standpoint, we sort of looked at this, the fact that we can go in and do whiteboards, we can do meeting notes, or we can do one sort of shared notes from a configuration. Again, it's really up to the individuals within the conference themselves how they're going to go in and set that up. So it's just, it allows, if you allow all the different parts, and that's one of the reasons why we looked at the actual conferencing policy. If you allow all the different parts, you literally can start with just a simple little instant message, and you can very quickly move from what we call an IM conference into, I've now got video up and running. I can actually right click and call you. So if you want to add in the audio on that part of it, I can share my desktop, or I can share a specific program, and very quickly, like I said, if everything is turned on, it allows you to sort of move from one configuration to the other configuration. And just sort of going through, as you can see, here's the instant messaging, here's the audio from a device standpoint. We looked at the video earlier, and of course then the participant list, or what they call on the roster. But it literally is just, again, clicking on the different icons within your configurations. So. And then finally, the last little part, at least in this lesson, is looking sort of the virtual desktop configuration. So the virtual desktop allows us to go in and do something sort of like this. So with the plugin, and again, it's a plugin you've got to download and install on your server configuration, you can go in and obviously connect from our remote clients. And really what it does is, by the way, once you install this VDL plugin, you have to go into the management shell and actually enable what we call media redirection. Okay, and once you enable media redirection, that allows you to connect in from the client to your server. So again, sort of your thin client over here on the left-hand side, connecting back into your remote desktop or something like that in, and then you actually open up Lync configuration. Now, what you're going to see within the Lync client is you'll notice a slight difference in the actual client itself. Down at the bottom, you'll see that it's been what we call paired. So it actually has established a pair connection in this case. And once it's been paired on that part of it, and you've got the VDA plugin installed in your server configurations, then as you go in and again connect to a conference, or you want to listen to audio, or you want to do video configurations, what it does is it redirects the audio and video. As you can see in this case, it actually plays that information from the client. Okay, and so from here, it is great. We've got a PSN call in, and as you can see, the signaling on that part of it, the signaling just routes this way. Okay, so while it looks like it's actually going to the front-end server, and that part of it, it's actually routing still. So any of the audio and video is actually playing on your, in this case, the client itself. So there's really sort of two different parts that you got to get into here. The first part, of course, is downloading the VDI plugin and doing the configuration on that part of it. The second part, of course, is enabling it in the management shell configuration that, yes, you're going to allow the media redirection. Most people probably get the first part, again, obviously installing it, double-clicking installing it, but again, unless you go to the documentation or somebody tells you, every once in a while some people miss oh yeah, that's right, we got to go and enable them for this part of it. So that would be probably the catch part that you got to be aware of. But everything else is still the same. You got your Office Suite installed, you got the Lync client installed. It's just the fact that it's redirecting into the audio video to actually play on the local machine. Some of you might have actually sort of played around with something sort of like this, not with a plugin, but just within, let's say, a client and a virtual environment. If you've attended some of our classes here, some of the times, especially like in, say, our Lync classes, we go in and actually enable all the enterprise voice configurations. And the only way to test that is to go in and actually remote desktop, using a remote desktop connection into an actual virtual image. Because the servers or the virtual images themselves don't support audio or video. So what we do is, in this case, you connect in through a remote desktop connection. You say play the video on the local machine, and then you connect in, and then we actually look at the virtual image. You'll see that the audio is actually enabled in that part of it. So in a way, it's sort of like what you're doing here. It's just in this case, we're doing a plugin, and then it's doing a redirect. And we're doing the same thing through a remote desktop, saying, hey, play the audio, but we're going to play it within the local machine, not in the actual virtual image. But this is doing it obviously for the whole virtual desktop configuration. So it's a support that, again, people try to do it in 10. You could get it to sort of work. Again, we could have fun with what happened, about 5 minutes ago, sort of the choppy, and it dropped off here a little bit. That's sort of the what you got in 10 from a configuration, because there was no plugin. It just, people were trying to pull stuff from the server over, and the servers really weren't meant for redirection of audio and video. So that's a nice little change that's happened, again, from 10 to 13, or this is all brand new for you guys coming from OCS to 13. So it's about 10:30, so we got a little bit to go. Any questions at the moment? Let's open this over a little bit of questions here before we continue on. Really? Nobody has any questions? Wow. All right, there we go. Jared, how well do hardware phones, IP phones work with the setup? Jared, probably the first question you got to take a look at is are you going to specifically use IP phones with Lync, say like enterprise voice enabled, or are you still using, let's say, RCC remote call control, where are they configured through, say, Cisco Avaya, something like that? So, Jared, that would be my first question: is what's going to manage the phones? Would be the first question. The second one, take a look at, Jared, would be to actually Cisco. Okay, is Cisco going to still be managing the phones themselves? Oh, okay. One of the things you're going to want to take a look at, if you open up a browser, and if you just do a search for, put in interoperability, and if you want to do Lync interoperability, either the first or second link, and it doesn't matter what browser it is, will be the actual Lync interoperability page. It will show you every piece of hardware, software that actually has been tested and authorized to work with Lync 10 and Lync 13. If you haven't seen that page, you definitely want to take a look at it. So that there very quickly will show you every piece of, every IP phone, every audio, every video that has been tested and authorized to work with Lync. Now, that's not to say there aren't other ones out there. Yeah, Lync interoperability, perfect. Yeah, just do a search off that. If you want, probably do like Lync 13, but either one should get you to that homepage. And there, when you hold it up, there's like 6 squares. Actually, here, let me just open up. I got a browser here, and I think we've got internet access. Yeah, first one right here. So infrastructure qualified for Lync. If you guys have not been to this page. So yeah, this is the Lync interoperability page. Let me close this. But if you look at it right here, the purple squares right here, if you click on each one, IP, PSTN gateways, supported PBXs, SPAs, SPCs, networking, hardware load balancing. This is just the first tab, because you look up here across the top, you see where it says infrastructure. You notice if I go back to video, on the video page, it shows me, again, the qualified endpoints down here along the bottom on that part of it, so you can take a look at that as well, too. If you go back to audio, here are your IP phones, audio and video devices, PCs, and, of course, the meeting room devices that have been tested and work with this one. So if you haven't looked at this page, again, that's an easy way to get to it, is just look at that configuration right there. Ray, the upgrade path is going. Let me ask the first part is there is no in-place upgrade. Everything will be a side-by-side migration. So there's no in-place. You can't just upgrade from, let's say, 7 or 10 to 13. By the way, the upgrade path, if you want to say, would be either OCS R2 or 10 to 13. So if you're running on OCS R1, you're going to have to either upgrade to either R2 or 10, and then from R2 or 10 to 13. But it's a side-by-side. It's going to be a lot easier to do it from 10 to 13 because in this case, you already have the central management store in place. So in this case, it's just a matter of building your 13 environment within that environment, and then at the last part, well, obviously migrating everything across. You're conversing your users from one pool to another pool, but in that case, the last thing you do is actually go in and actually just move the central management store to a Lync 13 environment, and then you can start decommissioning your 10 environment. OCS is going to be a little bit more difficult. It actually OCS R2 would almost be similar to what you would do from OCS R2 to 10, because you have to go through the whole schema prep, force prep, domain prep, but you've got to build the central management store. Whereas if you're already on 10, that's already in place. You still have to do schema prep, force prep, domain prep, but you don't have to build a central management store anymore. Any other questions? Yeah, Ray, actually, I wish you were with me last week. I actually did a little demo in this case. The first part actually from 10 to 13, literally in some cases. I mean, think about it right here. Let me just show you. We're right here. So if we're running 10 and 13, notice that we have a Lync server 10. If we open up the Lync server 10, your enterprise edition pools are here, your standard edition pools are here. You would have built out your 13 environment like we've got here. So then when I come back to the control panel, let me go to users for a moment. And if I go to users and click on find, we want to move a user from one pool to another pool. Let's highlight a couple users here. And I'll go under action, and you notice down here at the bottom we have move selected users to a pool or move all users to a pool. And that's just within the control. This is within the control panel. We could do it within the management shell, and you can do the same thing. So move CS user from one pool to another pool. So if I say move selected users and click on the drop down, okay, so let's pretend that this is the old pool for like 10 and this is the new pool. Choose the next pool. Okay, so we're going to put them there, click on OK. This force, by the way, over here, this is the last case scenario. I know it's very funny. It's last case scenario. You have not been able to figure out any other way to move the user across. And you would use this regardless if it's 10 to 13 or OCS R2 to 13. If you check that checkbox for force, what you're telling Lync to do is move the user but leave everything else behind. Their conferencing information, their contacts, anything that they have associated with that endpoint, that user, would be gone. Okay, so that little checkbox right there for us, that's like last case scenario. You have not been able to figure out any other way to get the user across. Now, some people look at it going, hey, well, it's an easy way to clean up all the contacts that they have. We can get rid of all of them and start over, which is a way to look at it. But in this case, it's just a matter of, I mean, if you're on 10, 13, it's click on the drop down, choose the pool, click on OK, or do it through the management shell, and you'll notice in this case the register pool will then be updated to they're now moved to the other pool. Now, don't get me wrong, Ray, there's a lot more than that. You've got, the endpoints, you've got your Exchange Unified Messaging endpoint configurations, you've got your IP phones, you've got your conversing data. Things you're just going to move these across, but it's not the same level that really we have from OCS R2 to 13. Right, yeah, no, that's actually a good tie-in. So, yeah, we could actually tie this directly into Module 2 when we talk about sort of the architecture and some of the changes. So, nice, you were checking out the PowerPoint slides. So, if we look at it again sort of here, Module 2, sort of the architecture and deployment changes, you can see we'll take a look at, we looked at some of this, but we'll look at some of the other configurations. Again, operating systems, disaster recovery, high availability, we'll definitely get into that. Archiving, that's been conferences, and of course then deployment configuration. So here we go. So one of the new changes in this case is, especially going from, let's say, 10 to 13, is we now have what we call a brick model layout. Now, side warning on the capacity down here at the bottom. Don't take that as that's what it is. I've seen different numbers depending on what white paper I've read, so do not take that. That's the capacity. It's 20 servers, 200,000, and that many provisioned users. Not part of it. But look at it from what we get into here is if we start with 10, okay, in 10 you could have up to 8 front-end servers, okay, in a pool. And again, we're talking about high availability, and they're all running the same configurations, and notice that it's tightly coupled to the back end. For those of you in 10, in this case, the database that we're talking about here, of course, is the RTC database. That was one of the primary databases that you have within your environment. RTC, of course, database is what stored the users that were enabled for Lync. as well as their contact information, as well as their conferencing information. So like if you were scheduling a repetitive conference every month, that information is actually sitting in the RTC database. Now, in a high availability like this, you are building clustering on the back end. Okay, and what is you can see in this case with the cluster back end, that actually they figured out that was actually sort of the bottleneck. Because every time that you and I were making a change, it was writing it through the cluster to the back end SQL servers. Okay. So, and of course that was capacity, depending on what white paper you read. Sometimes people had up to about 100,000 current users in this case that could be enabled at the same time, but it still was only from 10, or maybe in some cases I saw a couple of white papers that said 10 from a standpoint. But again, it would really depends on what you were doing. If you look at 13 in this case, the object being here is you can have, well, obviously we can have more servers themselves, but it's not set up the same way. It's not built away. In R2 or 10, you could actually do SQL clustering in the back end, and that was the preferred configuration. In 13, it's SQL mirroring. There is no SQL clustering, and it's not supported. Now, I saw a white paper that read, said yes, you can actually build clustering in this case for Lync 13, but from a support standpoint, it's not supported. SQL mirroring, of course, is what's used on the back end. So you're looking at either SQL 2008 R2 or SQL 2012. Yes, I know in SQL 2012 there's this always-on scenario that people are talking about in SQL 2012. You cannot use the always-on scenario from SQL 2012 with Lync. It's just SQL mirroring. The reasoning, sort of, from what I heard, was mirroring was supported in both 2008 R2 and 12. So at the point when they were building this configuration, that's what they chose because it's supported in multiple versions of SQL. And as they move forward in, let's say, the next version of this, they will look at what SQL's doing in this case and look at how they actually want to have the configuration set up. So for the standpoint of Lync 13, SQL mirroring is the preferred configuration. And it allows you to go in and you mirror the database in this case. So you have one SQL server in this case, your primary. You have a mirror from a configuration standpoint. And if you decide to, you can have a witness. So if, let's say, the first SQL server goes down, then again, you can either manually fail over if you just have a primary and a mirror. If you have a witness, it'll automatically fail over to the mirror. So in this case, here's just how many SQL servers you need to have. On the other side of this, you can see right here, it talks in the middle what we call, again, sort of the presence updates handled on the front-end servers. That RTC database has actually now been moved to the front-end servers. And in an enterprise configuration, the recommendation nowadays is generally you have 3 servers, 3 front-end servers. What happens is the users themselves are placed in groups, and the groups information is actually replicated to 3 servers. If you have, I'm going to say up to 20 here, but let's say you had up to 5 servers, that RTC database, specifically for that user in that group, would be replicated to 3 servers, the primary, a secondary, and a tertiary, okay, so a 3rd server. Okay, and those 3 would replicate the data. So instead of that RTC database sitting on the back end, it's actually replicating between 3 front-end servers. You and I add contacts, you and I add conferencing information, you and I delete information. Instead of it having to be written through this bottleneck back to the SQL server, it's now actually just on the front-end servers, but it's being replicated against, it's another service that we have called Windows Fabric. Windows Fabric actually would go in and replicate the data back and forth between the 3 configurations. Also, on the other side of it, with this brick model, is a specific amount of servers have to be up for Lync to be running. Okay. To give you an example, if let's say you have 2 front-end servers, well, at least one of them have to be up in order for Lync to run. Okay. Let's say you have 9 servers. Okay. If you have 9 or 10 servers, at least 5 of the front-end servers have to be up in order for your environment to run. So Lync won't run if you don't have enough servers up and running. Okay, so it's another part of when you start looking at what they call the brick pool here is you can just start building it out. You just add another front-end server, potentially have a mirror in this case. Of course, when you have a witness, if you decide to get into the high availability and have it automatic failover. Okay, and again, like I said, the RTC database is now replicating on the front-end servers. It's not replicating on, let's say, a back-end and a mirror. Don't get me wrong, there's still some data that's on the back-end server. If you go and take a look at it in an environment, you'll see there's an RTC shared database. And what you're going to hear is sort of a refresh. So the backend actually sort of just refreshes the front end data. Okay, but the RTC database has changed. It's not on the back end, it's now on the front end, and potentially up to 3 different servers. So that's sort of what we call the brick model here. So it's not clustering, it's mirroring, and the RTC database is moved from the back end to the front end server, or front end servers in this case. So, but because of that, yes, the capacity has gone up. So. Another thing that you're going to see, if we get into, is the monitoring, which I'm hoping for those of you who said you were on 10, you've actually published the monitoring, or you're using System Center Operations Manager and the agents to actually to monitor your servers. But you can get into the monitoring and actually take a look at, again, sort of the QE metrics or the call detail records. In fact, actually, I've got this set up. We should be able to take a look at this. So the first part, of course, is take a look at actually your monitoring. From a monitoring configuration, if we look at it, if I go back to our London pool, so again, our front-end pool, you notice right here, again, I've got our monitoring server already enabled. So again, I've got it mirrored. We'll talk about high availability disaster recovery. Ray, you were asking about consolidation of roles in this case. This is definitely one of the ones that's been consolidated. So the monitoring server now runs on the front-end server. Archiving is also runs on the front-end server. So those are two consolidated roles that you have that used to be separate in, well, either OCS or E10, where you had the services running in this case, but you still have the databases. So yeah, so both monitoring and archiving have been modified in this case, so they run on the front-end servers automatically. Monitoring is pretty much the same that we're used to in 10. So again, once you've got it published here on that part of it, you still go back to the deployment wizard and you'll still, again, publish out the reports. We come back to home right here, and if you click on the View Monitoring Reports, we should be able to open up our SQL Server here, assuming that everything's set up right. Give it a moment. All that's row through. For those of you who are running, let's say OCS R2, and you're going to this, the monitoring, as you well remember, in even OCS, you just felt like it was lacking, completely lacking from a configuration standpoint. I mean, don't get me wrong, the data was in there, but you really were dependent on your skill set, you yourself, or a SQL Server or DBA, to go pull that information. Yes, there were some third-party tools in there, but it was always sort of nice to have some stuff that comes with the actual software, out-of-the-box configuration. And so if you would install SSRS, so you're going to need SQL Server Reporting Services somewhere on your network, then you can install the monitoring reports. And this is what the monitoring reports look like from the reports themselves. You can see we get into user registration, we can take a look at peer-to-peer activity, conferencing summary, PSTN conferencing summary, response group usage. Somebody asked about the IP phones earlier. If Lync is managing your IP phones, you can actually do an IP phone inventory right here. So literally, it will show you every IP phone, based off of your configurations, as if Lync is managing it. CSE, CSE is a new area for 10/13. CSE allows you to manage the amount of audio and video on a per user, on a per site level, what we call column mission control or CSE. The user activity support. So what has the user actually been doing from a call diagnostics configuration? And then you can see we get into summary reports, peer-to-peer activity reports. I really haven't done much in here, so there's not much for us to look at. But any one of these, again, you can click on it, give it a couple seconds to run. Okay, when do you want to look for it? What kind of activity, both peer-to-peer or conferencing? The modality, in this case, we click on the view report. There probably isn't much here because I haven't done much. We got a little bit. So a little bit of user activity. So from added, here's a little persistent chat going on, doing some instant messaging, invite time, response time, end time. So a couple things going on. There's not much. There's only 7 sessions. But it is something, like I said, you can go in and click on reports, but you've got all the different reports. If you're troubleshooting in this case, like your top failures are right here. So again, notice we have the top failures or failure distribution reports that you can take a look at, your complex diagnostics, and of course then the quality experience, so your media quality. So you've got all these reports here. Plus, if you come up here, you've got the dashboard. And if we pull up the dashboard, hopefully, this sort of gives you a quick overview of what's going on in your network without getting to say, let's say, it's gone. So again, you can see in this case, your number of user logins, total number of sessions, audio sessions. You can see we get into video sessions as well too. This is the trend for the last weeks. I literally built this out, last night, so there's not much here at all. But again, your conferences, if there were problems, these numbers would be shaded either in yellow, which means it's a warning, or if it's really bad, it would be red. Okay. Now you can see pretty much everything here is zeros, but you can see the conferencing information, total organizers, minutes in this case. We take our call diagnostics down here, total users with call failure, users with poor quality, and of course then over here you can see we get into your media quality, as well as, if we scroll up a little bit here, we call it diagnostic. So how many failures, overall failure rate, for conferences and peer-to-peer. Because remember, there is a difference between a peer-to-peer, obviously, and conferencing. So this is the monitoring reports themselves. So number one, going and enabling that, but the monitoring server is now co-located on the front-end server. Archiving also is, from a configuration standpoint. In fact, actually, since we're talking about that, you'll notice if we look at our topology here back in the topology builder, do you see how I have archiving? SQL Server is not there. You have a change in 13. In 13, you could do exactly what you did in 10, which is to go in and actually build archiving, of which you needed a SQL Server for, and you could configure it so that you could actually archive everything to your Exchange server. Sorry, your SQL Server. The change in this case would be you have the ability, if you are in Lync 13 with Exchange 13, is you could configure it so you actually could set up your archiving to where it actually would go to your Exchange. And if you think about it, if you guys are used to running with Exchange 13, you have the whole e-discovery area. So you can actually use the e-discovery area to actually go in and query for content within, in this case, your environment. An end user doesn't have the ability to get to it, but if you assign somebody the ability to go and do an e-discovery, they can log into the Exchange configuration and run queries against any of your instant messaging. So the level of course you get into with archiving is the fact that you can archive instant messaging and most of a conference, not all of it. There's a couple PowerPoint slides that'll talk about it, but that's a change that you have from let's say 10 to 13. So archiving can either be the standard way that we've got it in 10, so you got a separate SQL server in this case, or you got a SQL database someplace that you actually configured for. So if I go in and right-click on this and go to the edit the properties of this, and we go down to our archiving configuration, it's pretty much the same steps we had in our other environment. So here we go, archiving. What's the archiving server? Are we going to mirror it? Of course, then fail over, and then of course then we've got a little bit of the file. It's going to ask for the file store. But we need to have a SQL server in place. Whereas if I go through and define archiving, welcome to another configuration we're going to do within the management shell, so I can actually configure archiving to send it to, in this case, Exchange. So it's a little bit different from a configuration standpoint. So, also, while we're talking about archiving, let's come back and take a look at this. On the monitoring part, again, you can see here we go. So if we click on the control panel, monitoring, archiving. The three different databases that get deployed if you're doing archiving/monitoring, okay, is your call detail record, so your LCS CDR database, and that's this one right here. And again, you can see by default, it's purge it. In this case, again, the theater for maximum arrays. The default is 60 days, but this is going to purge this by default. Monitoring really isn't meant for long term. But some people like to keep records. You can actually change the days if you choose to. The other database that gets created from monitoring is what we call QE metrics, quality of experience metrics. No, that's not QoS, it's quality of experience. And the object being in this case is what's the experience level. As you go back and look at the monitoring reports, again, what was the quality experience? Is there any kind of jitter, traffic, those sort of things that's happening. QoS is another part you can get into, but again, that's something else you're going to have to figure within the management shell and do some configurations for. But specifically for monitoring, you're looking at the QoE, or quality of experience. If you do archiving the way we did it in 10, then you had an LCS log database that was actually created. If you're going to configure this for Exchange, it's a little bit different, because again, that's going to be sitting in Exchange. So you've got two different parts. Okay? And if you look at how this sort of sets up, and for those of you who are 10, this should be familiar for you though, but for those of you who are coming from OCS days, you're going to see in a lot of areas here in the control panel that you're going to find that there's whatever it is policy and whatever it is configuration. The policy is just the values that you're either turning on or turning off or configuring. So to give you an example, watch out, there's a lot here, but in this case of an archiving policy, are we going to archive internal messages, both of them, none of them? It's up to you from a configuration standpoint. But you can see in this case, even though I defined a policy or didn't define a policy, I actually haven't turned it on. That would be actually the archiving configuration, and you notice that it says disabling. So if I double click on this one just to open it up, here's the first thing I've got to do. It's like, well, if I'm going to do archiving, I need to decide, am I going to do archiving just IM or IM in web conferencing sessions? And then you notice below it, if we enable something like this, here we go. Block instant messaging or web conferencing sessions if archiving fails. Exchange server integration. So if you're going to actually send this to Exchange integration, number one, you got to turn on archiving, but number two, you're going to have to check this checkbox. We still have to define the trusted paths within the management shell. And then finally, if you choose to, do you want to purge the data? Be aware about this one right here, the one that says block instant messaging or web conference sessions if archiving fails. If you're going to do archiving, remember someplace that you've turned this on. What this means is this. In some environments, you have to archive instant messaging for compliance regions. And if you can't archive or something happens where it's actually not archiving properly, that means you're no longer in compliance. So that's what this checkbox is for, is to make sure that as long as everything's okay, nothing happens whatsoever. But the minute Lync can't archive everything, it's going to go ahead and stop instant messaging or stop conference sessions in this case until you get that connecting back up so that you now stay within your compliance configurations. Okay? And so that's what that means. Now, the problem with this is individuals or people who have built this in this case, or maybe a consultant came in and actually built it for, let's say, somebody else in this case, you're coming over and taking over, is people sort of checkbox here. So all of a sudden it's 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and instant messaging just stops, and you go back in and try to figure out why did it stop when maybe somebody like a DBA went in and bounced your SQL Server on the back end, and until it came back up, Lync saying, hey, I've got to stop everything because we're not in compliance. So just remember that you have this turned on, so that again it's one of those things that you can go check the configuration. Is everything back up? Nope, it's not. Okay, hey, bring that back up. Hey, look, everything came back up. So I get this as a question every once in a while where people are like, hey, we can't figure out what's going on. It's like, well, number one, do you have archiving on? And number two, did you have that compliance configuration on? And if so, go check the back end to make sure you've actually got that it's still up and running, because that actually may be the issue. So it's not supposed to be a negative thing, and that's unfortunately what a lot of people look at it as. It's just that people sort of forget that, hey, we have to stay in compliance. You just need to make sure that you check, the other parts you've got connected to. Okay? That isn't any difference from what we had in 10, but just like I said, it's something I always like to talk about, but this is right here. So if you're actually going to archive to Exchange, number one, you need to enable archiving itself, and number two, you're going to actually check that checkbox for Exchange server configuration. That is just the first step. Don't get me wrong. Like I said, you've got to go in and configure your on-hold policies within Exchange. You have to go actually define the paths in this case from Lync to your Exchange configuration, which you're going to define within the management shell in this case. Some of these things, like I said, we really don't have time to go through all of it. If you guys come into class, that would be trust me, we'll go through it in class. But this would be the other part. Both of these roles, archiving and monitoring, are co-located on the front-end servers now. So if you had that as a separate machine in 10 or even in OCS days, those two roles are now on the front-end servers. So back to PowerPoint side here. On the other side of this, there is a management pack for System Center Operations Manager. You most likely will need a witness, meaning in this case an agent, that you're going to install the agent on in this case, as well as your a little bit of the Lync components need to be installed on it. And from there, of course, then you actually have the ability to go in and run all this through System Center Operations Manager. So two different parts you get into, again, either SCOM from a configuration standpoint, or obviously just the management reports themselves that you can get into and take a look at. So we've talked about this. Here's the desktop again. Again, a little bit of a review of what we talked about earlier. But again, with the VDI desktop, again, your remote desktop back into the servers. But you're going to play, in this case, the audio and video will be played on your actual machine. And like I said, you'll see that in the client when you connect. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a different icon. If it's not paired correctly, you got basically a little red X in this case saying let us know. If it actually is correctly, you'll see the green check, green circle with a checkbox. It'll say, successfully paired. And so the clients should be able to help you from a troubleshooting standpoint, because you can ask them, hey, is that, do you see the green icon down there? And they're like, nope. Okay, so we've got to figure out what's going on from a client standpoint. And here we go. So the big two, of course, with the monitoring and archiving servers can be co-located on the front-end server. Something else to be aware about, persistent chat. We looked at that a little bit earlier. If you are dealing with the standard edition of persistent chat, you can install the persistent chat service on that machine. If you're building out the enterprise edition, you cannot co-locate the persistent chat. Okay? So standard edition, yes. Enterprise edition, no. Okay? The Office Web Apps is a separate machine. So that's, again, if you're already doing SharePoint, you probably already got that up installed. But if you don't, it's a standalone edition. That's not something you can co-locate on a front-end server. So those are the two main roles in this case. So like I said, and depending on what you do with persistent chat, but it depends on whether or not you're doing Enterprise Edition or Standard Edition. But these are the two roles that we can actually get into. We talked about, again, IP6. Again, IP6 actually is now supported with Lync 13. It is really recommended that you get in what we call a dual stack here. So you actually will go in and actually use both IP4 and IP6. If we look at it from a topology standpoint here, so let me bring the topology builder back up. Okay, we'll go in and let's go back to our server here for a moment. If we edit the properties, so something like this is a good example. So I expanded out my London pool over here on the left-hand side, and I opened up my London, FU01 machine, and right-clicked on one of the properties of it. By default, I've got it enabled for IP4, and notice it says use all configured IP addresses. But here we go with the checkbox down at the bottom, enable IP6. So when you deploy this out or you add another server to the pool, it's going to ask you, are you using IP4, IP6? Again, the recommendation is if you are going to IP6, that you actually leave the IP4 on. Just because, again, like I said, unless you're in a pure IP6 environment, and that's actually relatively rare at the moment, that you would actually do IP4 and IP6 as well too. Yes, you can collocate monitoring, archiving, and yes, if it's a standard edition, the persistent chat, because again, you don't have that many people on a standard edition. Persistent chat can be collocated on a standard edition. On the enterprise edition, you cannot collocate the persistent chat. The other part would be this part right here in the middle where it says limit service usage of specific IP addresses. Do you notice that it says primary IP address and it says PSTN IP address? To borrow your consolidation that we're going into here, this is actually something, if you have the mediation server consolidated on the front-end server, which it is by default on the standard edition, but on enterprise edition, you can start actually building a standalone edition of the mediation server. If you have it consolidated like this, then you might actually want to go in and actually have two NICs. And the object being in this case is all of your Lync configurations would actually be the primary IP address right here. And then your other NIC would actually be for your PSTN calls, so the one you're going to connect back to your PSTN gateway. The other thing here is you can actually then have one NIC that goes out on the network, which is your Lync server and the configurations, and the other NIC you have that actually connected back to your gateway in this case, and so the traffic comes in one NIC and then of course then goes out on the network on the other NIC. Some people don't look at it; they want to just have everything as configured IP address because it's only one NIC. But it is something to think about if we're talking about consolidation, especially if you have the consolidated mediation server. Is you can separate the traffic because, again, remember, usually that's outbound or coming inbound traffic, separate from everything else that you've got going on that specific machine. But that's if you look at it from sort of the IP4, IP6 configuration that you're going to see that every time you go in and add a server, it's going to ask you, okay, are we doing IP4? Are we doing IP6? I said most of it's recommended that you actually do IP4 and IP6 if you're getting into that environment, and then over time it eventually will go pure IP6, but. At the moment, it's a sort of a dual stack. So. A little blur about obviously the hybrid environment or potentially a pure online environment. In a hybrid environment, of course, you're getting into, you've actually got not only connected to your Office 365 right now, but you still have on-prem. Now, this is something that in 10 people looked at, but were I don't know, they sort of went back and forth depending on their environment. You had to have two different domains. And so that was sort of a problem. You sort of had what we call a split domain, that you had a different domain for your Office 365 versus your domain that you had locally. Because you think about it, to give you an example, let's say you had like a .local or a .corp domain on-prem. You can't use that in Office 365, so you would actually have to have a com or something like that. From a domain name, so you actually had two separate domains in this case, so you had a split configuration. In 13, in this case, with Office 365, you can actually share a domain, but it still needs to be a routable domain, so it has to be a .com, .org, .something in this case. And you would actually define that when you go in and actually build your Office 365 configurations. Currently at the moment, and again, I know this is being recorded, so I'm going to say currently at the moment, you can go and test Office 365. Right now there's a 30-day trial version that you can actually go in and actually test it out, and you can actually enable all the different parts of it. So you can get into Exchange, you can get into SharePoint, you can get into Lync, Office 365 itself for 30-day trial free at the moment. But again, that's currently at the moment. So if you're looking at something like that, that's definitely something to take a look at. But it allows you to do most of it online. But from a hybrid standpoint, hybrid means you still have on-prem configurations. To give you an example of something, not necessarily everything is like enterprise voice is all online. To give an example, if you want to connect back to, say, like your PBX system, you will have to have on-prem configuration as well as your Office 365 configuration. So that's something that will change over time in this case, but at the moment it's still just something you're going to have. So you can do what we call a hybrid. And here's sort of an example. This is getting back to the Office Web Server, but sort of getting into the whole configuration of the let me backtrack a slide here to your hybrid environment. So they move forward back into the Office Web App Server that we talked about. But like I said, in this case, you can see what happens here is when you create a conference and you upload content, that content in this case is actually sent to the file store. Okay? So there's actually, of course, here's your front-end pool, the part of it. So you upload content, it actually sends to the file store. And there's actually a URL for it. In this case, and so when you actually connect on that part of it, your initial connecting to the conference, the instant, the SIP configurations, actually go through the Edge server connection to the conference on that part of it. Then as you go in and try to either download content or upload content, that's actually an HTTPS request. And you can see from here that that's where your reverse proxy comes into place. And your reverse proxy in this case will then connect to, through the reverse proxy, in this case, back to the front-end server. And the front-end server, of course, will have an authentication code that then sends that information to your Office Web App Server, which will then go get the actual file information that we look at it, bring it back over here, and then finally render it within a browser so that you can actually see this. Okay, so when you actually click on that conferencing information or click on a download, it's an HTTPS request that you're doing, which is going to go through reverse proxy. So as we started getting into the Office Web App Servers, this is where you start looking at it as another reason why we have to have the reverse proxy. It wasn't just for remote users anymore, but pretty much anything you download from outside, you're going to need a reverse proxy because you have to publish the path. So be aware that both while we're here, the Edge server and the reverse proxy, you're going to need certificates. On the Edge server, of course, you're going to need the external side, one from a public CA. Okay, so again, Equifax, GoDaddy, VeriSign, something like that. You can have to purchase a certificate from a public certification authority, where literally everything on the network, if you have your own certificate configuration in place, you could actually just use certificates on your network. So you need one for the reverse proxy, you need one for the Edge server. The reverse proxy and Edge server cannot be co-located. Those are two separate servers, two separate roles. One's actually part of your Lync configurations, and another one's just sort of a standard reverse proxy. Here's an example where, as you can see, they've moved the Office Web App Server because we have more people outside that are connecting to it. So because of that, they've moved it into the perimeter zone. And you can see it's still sort of the same information. Again, they are external. They connect to the Edge server back into the conference. We upload content. It's sitting in the file store. Notice that the file store is still on the network. It's not in the DMZ. But when you click on something to take a look at it, that is going to go through reverse proxy. It's going to go request information from the front-end server. The front-end server will then give it the authentication code to go get the content from the file store to bring it all the way back to the actual Office Web App servers to finally say you can actually render it. Because remember, the whole object of, again, an Office Web Application Server is to be able to render the content within a browser. Here's one where it's hosted online. So just, again, the same content. They're just showing you 3 different ways in which the Office Web App configuration can be set up. So the director role, in this case, still exists. I don't quite agree with what it says here from its de-emphasized. It really depends on your security configurations. Yes, you can do the director role in Lync 13, just like you can in 10, just like you can in 7. It really depends on your security environments that you want to get into. If you, like I said, you can see in this case we've got a 2-zone security requirement that you can get into. I know it does make it a little more difficult from a building standpoint, and that's one of the reasons why some people are like, well, do we really need it? Because we're trying to consolidate roles. But if you're looking from a security standpoint, remember the director role is the one that actually can stop requests coming in from outside. The Edge server itself would. Would I use it, Ray? Yes, I would. But it's also going to depend on, if we're doing a lot of external connections in this case, then yes. If I'm not doing that many external connections in this case, then probably not. So it will definitely depend on how much traffic we've got going and where the traffic's coming from. I don't have any problems with it installing it. I've built it, so. But I know, like I said, there's a few things, because remember, the director server, you think about it, there's 4 roles. Yeah, there's 4 roles that actually authenticate users: the director server, the front end server, and either an SBS or an SBA. Okay, and so in some cases it really sort of depends on the environment you're in. If you're in a small environment, you've got a couple hundred users, you may or may not use it. Especially if everything's internal, then you don't need the director role because you don't have an edge server. But if you're it could be a fun conversation we get into. Let's leave it at that. But you really got to look at your environment to decide how you want to actually build this out. It is still supported in this case to go through. And again, it depends on what white paper you read. Some people are like, yes, you need it. Other ones are like, no, you really don't. But it's always sort of been in that role, unfortunately, all the way back to OCS days. Because as you're talking about it, we're trying to consolidate servers. People looked at it going, okay, great, it's just another server out there, really just doing authentication and passing it through. So, but if you have a lot of external traffic, the director role with the management shell, you can actually go in and configure it so that if you're getting too many requests from a certain, say SIP domain or whatever, you can have the director role automatically block that information. Versus sending it directly to the front end server if you don't have a director server. If you have multiple pools on your network, you can actually route everybody internal to the director, not the pools, but to the director, because remember, the director does the authentication, and then it will route them, or they will route them, because you can build this in a pool. You can route them to the specific pool that end user is part of. So there are some things that you can do in this case, but yeah, when people look at, I just want to consolidate stuff, they may or may not want this role. So you've got to make the decision, do you want to have it or not? So another change that we get into is this. A little bit of history here. If we look on the left-hand side, in OCS days you had the mediation server, that's what MS stands for, to gateway, which is what the GW stands for. And it was always a one-to-one relationship. So if you had multiple front-end servers, you had multiple mediation servers, you had multiple gateways. In Lync 10, we supported, as you can see, 1 to N, meaning in this case you could have more than one gateway associated with the same mediation server. Okay. In Lync 13, now you can see we get into, not only do I have multiple mediation servers, but I can have multiple gateways as well too. And do you know something like this where I got the 3 blue bars up here? You can actually define more than one path to the same gateway. Okay. So if you think about it based on the routes, the patterns to match, I can actually have it go, well, I'm going to go this route, this gateway, or obviously route it the other way. So now you sort of get into, you can mix and match any gateway to any mediation server that you want and have failover. Because one of the things that's going to happen with 13 is, let's see if it adds it in down here in the bottom. Yeah, is what we get into in our class configurations, we'll talk about this, is the fact that the gateways and the mediation servers are talking to each other, and there's some signaling sending back and going back and forth. And if the gateways don't respond with the right signaling to the mediation server is going to assume that the gateway is down. And if the gateway's down, then it won't even use it when it's sending out the next call, so it'll look at the next configuration it's got. So there's configurations you got on the mediation servers, configurations you got on the gateway, so that it can adjust on the fly. Versus sometimes in this case, unless you were right there watching the monitoring, sometimes you didn't know that your gateway was down for a couple of minutes. You had to try to figure out how to route it because you didn't have a backup gateway in place. So there's some more transactions going back and forth between the gateways and the mediation servers to allow this. Also, from a standpoint, we look at, of course, you got the media bypass. If it's supported, that's something to be one of the questions you're going to ask when you actually talk to your service providers. If we're going to do something like a media bypass allows us to bypass the mediation server. Let me give an example. By default, let's say we're doing, for fun, Lync 10. We were using RT audio in-house, RT audio narrowband or RT audio wideband. If you're making an outbound phone call, you were going to potentially, let's say, a PSTN gateway. Well, generally, a PSTN gateways, better quality, of course, is the G711 versus RT audio. So that was what the role of the mediation server was to be able to translate the signaling and potentially encryption, because remember, it was RT audio over TLS. Okay, so you translate the signaling to, let's say, G711 over maybe TCP. because that's what they were using. Again, we're not using a direct SIP configuration. So using with the PBX in this case, so you configure it that way. So with the ability to go in and what we call bypass the mediation server or media bypass, that signaling still ends up talking to front end services. Okay, this is an outbound phone call, but if we're supporting in this case bypassing of the media, then therefore instead of starting with RT audio, you're going to start with GSL11. It goes directly to the gateway. Okay, now the gateway has to support more than one connection to it, so that's definitely a question you're going to have to ask, is to find out whether or not that actually is supported or not supported, because if it's not supported, then it has to be the mediation server to the gateway, and we're almost sort of back to where we were here, where it's a one-to-one relationship. Some of the asks also would be like your SBCs. Some SBCs only allow one connection to it, which again would be the mediation server. So that's something else to take a look at. Yes, you can get into whether or not you're doing SIP trunks in this case, or you're doing a direct SIP configurations, but this is specifically talking about a gateway, which is usually in between you and the actual service provider that you're using. So, but this is things that, again, that's in the 5-day enterprise voice class. We'll take a look at it. But it is a change to the fact that you now can set up, different configurations here, so you can have multiple paths to the same gateway, and it's still based off the routes, patterns, and matches, and expressions that you define. So we've done topology builder. So operating system itself is changed in this case. So from an operating standpoint, to be honest, I would actually remove this one. Okay, yeah, I took it out. So the Windows 2008 R2 Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, Data Center, of course, or of course Windows 2012, the G 2. 2008 itself is not supported. This has to be a 64-bit edition. Also, if you look at it, especially if you're running, let's say, 2008 R2 operating systems, you're going to need PowerShell 3.0, not 2.0. So be aware that that comes with 2012 automatically. But you got PowerShell 3.0 that you have installed. IIS needs to be installed on your front-end servers. SQL we talked about, of course, SQL 2008 R2 or SQL 2012. But yeah, it needs to be a 64-bit edition, either 2008 R2 or 2012. Notice it has to be the full-blown version of the server itself. Again, you cannot run anything on core. Lync does not run on the core edition of anything, or the web editions. So, yes, you can virtualize everything. So literally every role can be virtualized. So that's another one when people get into VMware that you can actually set up, again, either a VMware or Hyper-V, either one. You can do it. But again, it just every role is supported. Whereas you go back to, say, like OCS days, it was, you could do OCS R2, but they really didn't recommend it for voice, and it was 10 that everything became. Now, from a standpoint of here, when we start looking at a little bit of high availability disaster recovery, with high availability disaster recovery, this is sort of getting into, as you can see here, it's one data center, but you got two different sites. Okay, and as you can see, you're spanning two different configurations depending on how we've got set up. What you've got here is what we've got two sites, but you've got the other ones what's called paired. You pair the pool. And pairing the pool allows you to go in and literally have a backup on the other pool. Now, how this works is when you build out, let's say, one site over here on the left-hand side. Let's say you got a couple front-end servers in this case you go through. You've got, again, a mirroring on this side as well, too. What you can do is you can actually set it up to where either one of these sites, you will build no more than 50% of the capacity. And the object being in this case is if I lose one site, the entire thing goes down. All the data has been actually replicated over to site number 2. So other than just maybe updating a few records in this case, everybody now will actually go over here to this side, which means that you have to be able to support all of your users on one side or the other side. Okay, so when you build this out, it takes a little bit to think about, but in this case you can see that each load, you will only hit the capacity maybe 50%. Why? Because again, you actually have to support the other pool as well too. This is what we call pairing a pool. When you deploy this out, you have to go through the topology builder first. Then you've got to rerun the deployment wizard to introduce what we call what's listed right there, the backup service. And the backup service is actually what replicates this information between one pool and the other pool. And as long as the two pools are up, great. It's just replicating data back and forth. And notice it is in real time. And then depending on what happens, then you fail over to the other pool. Okay, so all the data is already on the other side, and you take it from there. So what are we talking about here? Well, let's go back and take a look at this for a moment. If I'm going to take a look at my pool here, I'm going to right-click on it, go to the properties of it. We're going to take a look at a couple things here, a little bit of high availability and disaster recovery. Okay. The first part of high availability, you notice that I've done this on pretty much everything here. So the SQL Server that we're using for our, again, real databases. So again, notice I'm using a SQL Server, again, an instance, by the way, of Lync. Notice I've set it up for enabling mirroring. So when I click on enable mirroring right here, if you don't have one, you're going to click on the new button. And you click on new and you define the SQL Server, either the default instance or named instance. And notice that again, with a port, this is the default port that we use is 5022. Now, if you just do mirroring and the primary store itself, if the SQL Server goes down, this is your high availability, then you're going to have to manually fail over. Okay, which means you're going to have to go into the management shell and you're going to say, okay, I'm going to fail over to the mirror. Okay, so if I do something like this, I should be able to, let's say, get CS. How about CS? Why is it not on my? No, that's my backup server configuration. That's not what I wanted. Why am I not getting my mirror? I forget the command at the moment, so I'll have to figure out what it is. But you can go and actually take a look at, oh, there we go. See, I'll have a CS replication. That's reporting. That's not what I wanted. Okay. I'm going to have to remember the command. I don't remember off the top of my head right now. But you can go and actually take a look at the replication status. And it would show you that, again, you've got the primary and the mirror in place. And then you invoke a failover pointing to the mirror. Now, if you have a witness in place, like in this case, you can see I've got a SQL mirror witness right here. If I have the witness in place right here, this allows it to automatically fail over. Okay, but it does require another SQL Server. So in the case of this one, if my primary went down, the mirror would take over automatically because the witness would tell it to. Okay, so that's when you start looking again, you're sort of high availability. To take a look at the actual databases here for a moment, okay, and you can see if you've got it all set up, I'm going to just open up London SQL 1 here, so SQL Server. We will open up a SQL instance. Okay, so again, notice London because my specific instance is called Lync. By the way, side note when we're looking at this, if you go back over here, when you define, I'm going to just click on New, when you define a named instance, please make sure you put everything in uppercase. Do not put anything in lowercase in a named instance. So, if we come back over and take a look at SQL, in this case, I'm just expanding the databases. You can see, let me move this over just a little bit here. Right, so in this case, you can see all the different databases, but notice I have principal and the synchronized. So again, your call park service dynamic, again, LCS CDR, call detail record, location information services. MGC stands for, again, Microsoft Group Chat. Here's the Microsoft Group Chat compliance services. So it's persistent chat, but they still the same names. Called experience metrics, response group configuration, response group dynamics, RTC address book, RTC shared, RTC XDS, and of course then the XDS is the actual primary. Okay, so these are all mirrored in this case to go through. So it's right now, this is the principal. And if I go over and take a look at the SQL 2, you'll see it's actually got the mirror and it's synchronized. So it's letting you know, or it's in recovery. But all that from a like I said, just doing it here. When you click on OK and actually publish this, like everything else we do in the topology banner, there you go. Nice, thanks, Joe. I'll bring it back up. There we go. Get CS. There we go. So yeah, it's going to kick out a lot of stuff here, but if we take a look at get management store replication status, there we go. So London FE1, okay, last replication status. Oh, this is replication status. Oh, that's essential management store. Now I just want the mirror status. Yeah, I forget what it is off the top of my head. But this, I mean, this is good to know too. Management store replication status. This is actually the replication of this. So that's going back to the topology builder right here. Yeah, it's fine. Topology builder, make sure it's replicated out. This is the way to do it in the management shell, is just get the central management store replication status. Have I replicated or not? Okay, so in this case, you can see, yes, everything has been replicated. It would be the same thing as you and I looking at the green check boxes right here. So, yeah, Joseph, I wanted to just go in and actually just pull up the mirror status. So, But once we've got that published like this, so again, you're able here, again, I can scroll down and take a look at it. Notice I did it for monitoring as well too. So again, I've got a single store. Here's the mirroring, and of course then there's the failover. Here's our pool association. But here's the other part. So to get into the actual pairing of a pool, for those of you on 10, it's not going to look that much difference than what you did for 10 for voice resiliency. Okay, for voice resiliency, you clicked on the checkbox right here and you said associated with a backend site or pool, and you clicked on the drop down and shows the other site or the pool, and then you decided in this case for automatic failover for voice, you define the failover and the failback. Okay, well this also, again, notice is now associated backup pool. This is actually your resiliency from a standpoint of your pairing of the pool. You do it this way. Okay, so you go in and actually set this up, publish this again, and like I said, then you go back into rerun step number 2 in your deployment, which introduces the backup service. And if I go back and bring up services really quick, and if we go down and take a look at this, you'll notice that we now have a backup service right here. Also, by the way, we have actually a file transfer agent right here as well too. These two roles are introduced when you actually pair the pool, because this is what's used to actually back up from one to the other from a pairing of the pool configuration. The object being in this case is now on my sites, or my pools if you want to say. Oops, let me bring that back up. On my pools here, oh, I closed it. Let me just open topology. We'll do the test. That was the last one here. Okay, so now in this case, I've got both of these pooled. Okay, meaning they're paired. So what happens is, let's say the entire London site goes offline. Well, because we've replicated all that data out to the other pool, again, all I need to do is invoke a failover, and if a failover in this case you go through, now everybody will be pointed to Redmond for everything. And that's why when you build this out, something like this, is you don't build any one side for more than 50% of the capacity. Because if, let's say, London goes down, Redmond now has to handle everybody. Okay? Now, when you pair the pools, something to be aware about is it's a one-to-one relationship. You have to, London, in this case, because I've only got 2 sites, London has to be paired with Redmond, Redmond has to be paired with London. Okay, let's say, for instance, I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint side and just go to a white screen here for a moment. Okay, so let's say we've got 3 pools. We've got pool 1, we've got pool 2, and we've got pool 3. Okay, if we're doing pairing of the pools, you can pair 1 to 2, and 2 has to go to 1. You cannot do P1 to P2, P2 to P3, and P3 back to P1. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so it has to be when you pair the pools, it's on a one-to-one relationship. Also be aware that you have to do this from Enterprise Edition to Enterprise Edition, Standard Edition to Standard Edition. So this is the one part that you can get into from, if you want to say, a little bit of disaster recovery, is the fact, or it's not really high availability, but disaster recovery where you can pair 2 Standard Edition servers. So if one Standard Edition server goes down, the other one, you've got everything on the other. Okay? So it is possible. So, but when you build this out, again, each side will only support up to 50%. So that if the other pool goes down, let's say you've got 2 front-end servers on one side, 2 front-end servers on the other side. In case you got one SQL server, or you got 2 SQL servers in a mirror configuration. Okay, so you've got, let's say, 10,000 users on one side, you've got 9,000 users on the other side. Okay, so if one pool goes down, you've got 19,000 users that are being against 2 front-end servers on the other side. You should be fine. Okay. If you have, let's say, 17,000 users on one side and you still have 9,000 users on the other side, and if it fails over, again, we're assuming the 9,001 fails, now you've got 26,000 users trying to be authenticated against 2 front-end servers on the other side. Again, you really don't have the capacity for it. So that's where you get into, again, sort of a couple things there. Number 1, the high availability. 2, of course, getting to disaster recovery, where you can get into and actually set up the pairing of pools. In this case, you get into something exactly like what we've got here, is you can have 2 different data centers. It does not matter where they are in this case. So you could have one in New York, one in Chicago, you have one in, let's say, Florida. We could have one in, Washington in this case. And again, you just do the backup service. The backup service is what replicates the data back to the other, in this case, data center. So if you lose one side, you can just do a little bit of failover in this case, and everything's back up. Meaning, from a standpoint, you can still run on that part of it. But in some cases, your users might have a little bit of what we call survivability mode. They might get a little yellow bar. They might get disconnected or reconnected really quickly. In this case, depending on what services go down. But that's it. And then, of course, then when you get the initial pool back up, you can fail back to your pool that you've got set up. Okay, so two different parts. This is definitely one of the things that, again, they listen to from a 10 to 13 configuration. Is just it really sort of is the metropolitan deployment, but not at that cost standpoint, because now it's just, again, mirroring, and of course then, like I said, set up the pools where you can just replicate the data between them. So here's sort of an example, again, sort of look at the front-end pair pooling. So in 10 we had clustering in this case. 7 we definitely had clustering. 10, of course, is where they introduced DNS load balancing. There are 4 roles that you can support DNS load balancing on. So instead of having to have a hardware load balancing, so $5,000, $6,000 cost at the minimum, you can use DNS load balancing, which would be a front-end server, an edge server, a director server, and if you built a standalone edition of a mediation server, you could actually have that 4 roles would be supported for DNS load balancing. But remember, DNS load balancing is only for anything SIP related. If you're trying to download content, that does not go through DNS load balancing. So you would still need an HLB. So you've got to look at the deployment to figure out what you're actually doing. Okay. Also be aware that, again, on the edge server, if you're federating with anybody running OCS, and it doesn't matter if it's R1 or R2, if you're doing PIC, Public Internet Communications, those also don't support DNS load balancing. It's not that you can't build it, it's just that if something fails, they're not going to be all, the old clients do not know how to fail over. They do not cache all the records for DNS load balancing. So that's your server failure. From a back-end failure in this case, you can see we still had clustering on a part of it. But again, you can stand. In this case, now it's just SQL mirroring. Okay, so we're mirroring between 2 backends in this case. You can do a failover automatically if you have a witness or it's a manual. The time frame in this case to fail over, 5 minutes, 15 minutes tops. And as you can see in this case, yeah, either between the topology builder, the control panel, or even a little bit of the planning tool is how you actually can integrate this. So from a disaster account standpoint, again, if we had a pool failure, so you would go back and you had to do a SQL backup or restore on that part of it. You had voice resiliency in 10, okay, but it was voice resiliency, and this was the expensive one, the metropolitan deployment. Now in this case, you can see we still have the same voice resiliency we had in 10, but with again, multiple PSTN configurations, you can do an auto failover or fail back versus our what we call, again, pairing the pool. Right? So it doesn't matter where they are in this case, again, using the backup service to replicate that data. By default, it is manual in this case. There is no automatic failover for this configuration. They looked at that, but decided at this level that we're not ready for that, just from a configuration standpoint. So it's a manual. You will have to manually fail over. That doesn't include your travel time to get in to recognize that it's down in this case. That's just you actually run the commands, but it's a manual configuration. Notice there's one little caveat down here at the bottom. That pairing of the pools does not support, from a disaster recovery standpoint, as you can see, response group services, call park services, E911, or CAC, or call mission control. Okay, so that's on, if you think about it, that's per pool. You can't restore your response groups, in this case, to somebody else's pool. It's not going to work that way. So, and then notice it again, the site failure, it's not supported in this case, because again, it's just you're just pairing the pools. So. Here's an HADR, sort of some metrics in this case. Again, depending what feature it is, pretty much if you look at it, we're looking at more from a standpoint of everything is yes, except for a couple things here. Call detail record, quality experience, that's on a specific pool or site, response group services, and CAC. Everything else in this case can be, at one configuration or another, either have a high availability or you can do a disaster recovery. Some of the things you're going to have to do it within, again, the topology builder. Like say you lose an entire edge configuration and you only had one edge configuration, you're going to have to build another pool in this case, but you just have to update your topology builder, republish it, wait for that information to publish out, and you're back up in business. Right? So it really depends on, what it is we're talking about or what goes down. Most things in this case, you have your high availability, so you had your pools. If I kick out of this again and we go back to our topology builder, you'll notice that on your Lync servers, you've got, again, energized edition pools, director pools, mediation pools, persistent chat pools, edge pools, and of course then the trusted application servers. So each one of these roles here, other than the servers themselves, the standard edition, which is one machine, the rest of these things, you can have more than one server in a pool or specifically, again, the application servers. So there's different configurations, again, sort of looking at some of the back-end configurations of availability. We've talked about the conferencing features. Here's the web apps again. Again, it just allows us to render your PowerPoint slides and everything else, like I said, through the management, through the Office web apps. Let's take a look at our PowerPoint slides here. Okay, here's the multimedia. Any questions at this point? I know we're coming close to the end here. Here's an example, sort of again, as you can see, the multi-view. If I'm a presenter, I can do high definition, I can do CIF. What will happen is I'll present it on, let's say I'm running high definition, I'll present it as a high definition feed. But as you can see in this case, Brian connected it at 720, so he gets a high definition. Heidi connected, and she has only the ability to handle a CIF video feed. So what will happen in this case is I'll actually have another feed that will actually come out. In this case, your audio video multi-point control unit, which is another word for server. But again, in this case, Heidi will be able to actually get a CIF configuration. So while it's one for me, potentially in this case, as the presenter, it's all based off the end user themselves. So, of what they can handle. And that's actually in the management shell, there's a couple of new commands in this case, so it's more bandwidth allocated, so how much bandwidth do they have versus, can they handle just, great, everybody gets high definition, but if you can't handle that, you get a bad experience. So we talked about XMPP, so again, this is actually two parts. There's a proxy and a gateway. Part of it is installed on the front-end server, part of it is installed on the edge server. So this is, again, a different change, because in Lync 10, you had the same configurations that we had in OCS days, so it was still a separate configuration in this case. But now it's actually all part of the deployment process. So it's when you publish your topology and then just go and configure it. So, and then of course, then make sure you got your records for it. We're just talking about mobility supports. Archiving we talked about. But let's take a look at some of the changes here. Here's the new part. So the new part in 13 is the fact that we didn't have the ability to do this in 10, but now you can now archive whiteboarding and polls. So that's another step that we now have within, let's say, archiving. Okay. Archiving, of course, two different ways, either through SQL Server, which is the same way we had in 10, or if, as you can see here on the PowerPoint side, Exchange. Where if you configure Exchange and we set up the archiving configurations, you can actually have all that information sent over to your Exchange. And then based off of your policies, if you have an on-hold policy within Exchange, Lync 13 will honor that on-hold configuration. So, and then you have the e-discovery within Exchange that allows you to go and actually take a look at the messages or content if we're doing actually IM content as well too. So here's sort of just again, same PowerPoint side. Again, mailbox on hold. You got to have it set up for that part of it. Again, you can do discovery. You actually preserve it as well too. So literally, you can do it on hold. So find this and don't allow them to actually remove that content. So this is the whiteboards. Yeah, we've talked about all this. If there's anything new on the PowerPoint sides. Well, I'm looking at slides. Any other questions? Pretty much covered most of this. We talked about conferencing already. Here would be, again, just to sort of show you from a conference itself. Okay, here's sort of, as you can see, the sort of the new look and feel with the disclaimer, with the footer in this case. Down here at the bottom, here's sort of the legal disclaimer that they put in. Notice you've got a legal, you've got a help, you've got your dial-in pin, but here's sort of that footer down here. What it doesn't show you, of course, is the picture. You can actually put a little picture in here as well too, but that's sort of getting you back into your conferencing content. So. And actually, yeah, if you get into scheduling, you can actually do it online. If you don't have, let's say, the Lync client to schedule a meeting, you can actually open up and connect through the web part and actually schedule a conference through through your web configuration as well too. And if you enable the actual Outlook configuration, notice you can actually have your presence level. Somebody's having fun with Stevie Queen up here, but you can actually enable your presence level within the Outlook web app configurations. You'll have to define your CAS server as a trusted application, but you can actually have your presence information. And notice we have your contacts down here in the lower left-hand corner that show up as well too within Office web apps. So you have to define both sides. They have to trust each other, but it allows you to actually render that information within the Outlook web app configuration as well too. Here's just the join the meeting part. Somebody's busy calendar. So. All right, a little bit on voice. So enterprise voice. Enterprise voice, if you want to say some of the new parts you can see right here, again, you allow them to forward phone calls. That's something that's now enabled by default. You deal with it, of course, there's simultaneous ringing. One of the ones actually is probably new is this part right here, is the voicemail escape right here. So again, let's say you've got it set up to forward to your cell phone, but it's off or it's turned on, out of battery or whatever. You can actually enable it, so Lync can determine in that case that it shouldn't actually be sent there. So it would then actually disconnect that call, if you want to say, to that individual phone, and then allow it to ring to the rest of the endpoints that the end user is connected to. So that's another nice little change that we've got. Because sometimes, again, you said somebody had a call, they had it forwarded to their cell phone in this case, but their cell phone was turned off or out of range, and so therefore, they either didn't get the call or, just it didn't send it back to the Lync configuration on the part of it. So. Response groups, you have the ability, of course, within response groups, go in, there's the new management, so you can actually go in and set up a specific manager if you want to manage one specific workflow within response group configurations. So that's a new change that we have here. And the call part, still the same, hasn't really changed too much. But you do have, of course, disaster recovery because it's part of the, if you that database actually is then again replicated over to your other pool. So that would be really the new part. But other than that, pretty much the same. I don't know, people use it or not did. So. And here's where you get into, again, sort of a perfect example of what we talked about. Again, if you're connecting back to a PBX environment, you'll notice on the right-hand side over here, you still have your on-prem configuration connecting back to your PBX, but everything else is in Office 365. So you got Exchange Unified Messaging, you've got Lync servers, and again, that when you make a phone call back out, it will actually bring it back down through your edge server. You're going to have an edge server locally on-prem to your front-end server, and then actually make the phone call out. So it is something you can do. You can enable your voice configurations and still use Office 365 in that part of that. So. All right, we got about 10 minutes. Like I said, and let Brian take over if you would. Brian, do you want to step in?
Yeah, thanks, Doug. And I just went ahead and shared my screen. So I really appreciate the fantastic overview here, and I'm sure everyone on the call was able to get something they needed from your presentation. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to showcase some of these enhancements. So I run the Southern California and Nevada offices for Quick Start. My name is Brian Long, and before we get into some of the questions for Doug or even myself, I just want to spend a few minutes here to review some of the additional training opportunities that everybody could consider to continue the education, whatever learning path they're on for Lync 2013. So currently we're offering 2 Lync 2013 classes on our public guaranteed to run schedule. So they're the 2 here listed that you should be able to see my screen. It's the MS 20336, that's the core solutions of Lync 2013, and the MS 20337, enterprise voice and online services with Lync 2013. So the first course, the MS 20336 core solutions class, focuses on how to plan and design, deploy, configure, and administer, whereas the MS 20337 is going to focus more on our enterprise, the design and configure of enterprise voice and online services. So what I want to do is just kind of quickly show everyone how to navigate through our website. It's very user-friendly, and it has a lot of details on these classes. So if you click through to this first course, it's going to be the same for the second. We first show you if this is eligible for any software assurance training vouchers you may have. We accept quite a few of those each year, and we need 5 for this course. So if you have those, then great. That's we can accept those for payment. These are the different dates that we're running in the class, so pretty much every single month, and the various locations that you can attend from. This is the overview. When we break it down into each one of these components, you start to see all the finer details in terms of audience, at course completion, what you will cover, what you need to know before you attend, and then every single module that's going to be covered, and then the labs that you'll be doing. So it's basically all spelled out here, and then typically we have some in-depth reviews of each one of these courses. We've only got a couple here. Obviously, Doug was great. Doug is great. So we've got some comments on to the right. All right, so we also offer some Lync 2010 classes in case you guys are still on that platform and need some training. Those are located down here. I always want to highlight one in particular. This was a Mega Lab class that actually Doug developed, and we run every so often still. It's very good. Doug identified some areas that Microsoft could have really enhanced this course, and so he spent, I think, about 6 months building this out, and it's really unique Lync course that Doug runs, and we get a lot of positive feedback on. So all of our classes are run on Lync 2013, so we're a perfect case study for how to do it, and we're in the top 5 actually in the world in terms of Lync meeting minutes, because not a lot of people use it like we do, where it's for all their classes 8 hours a day. So we've had to spend a lot of time with Lync, customize it, working very closely with the Microsoft team. So it's definitely a very polished enterprise platform at this point. So at this time, I'm going to actually pass it back to Brittany to address any final questions you have for Doug or myself. And I just want to say I really appreciate everybody's time and attention this morning.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Doug. You guys were great. We're opening it up right now for Q&A, so if anybody has any questions for Doug on his presentation, I know he took some time to take some of those questions, but if you guys have any questions that weren't answered during Doug's presentation, ask now, and then also for Brian, well, when it comes to the classes. So go ahead and type in your questions now if you have any. We'll wait a couple seconds to see if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, Kale, just to answer the question from an audio standpoint. With the classes just literally being released, there's some configurations we're still looking at, and then, of course, then how to sort of combine the configurations on that part of it. So they've got me scheduled a little bit here. Obviously, we're in second quarter already, so we're probably looking at third or maybe fourth quarter, depending on the configuration of it. So, but it will be on the website.
Jared and Ray, actually the webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a survey no later than Friday, and once you fill out that survey, you'll receive the recording of this seminar with the slides, or it'll show the slides in it.
And Brittany, this will be on our Knowledge Center site, correct?
Yes, it will be. Yes, Ray, there will be audio, so it'll show everything that we're talking about will be, you guys can all hear them, and then you'll be able to see the slides as well. If there are no other questions, I'll go ahead and wait another couple seconds to see if there are any more. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining. And Doug, thank you so much for your presentation. And Brian, thanks for your time as well. And that will conclude this seminar. Thank you.